Thank you. That's your Dharma. Jim, that's your Dharma now, okay? If you don't mind, if you will accept the Dharma of reminding me. Okay. All right, so let me just view speaker. Okay, friends, so closed caption transcript. This is my whole computer is unfamiliar to me. The techies have been fiddling around. I'll get on the phone with them on Monday. But we'll make it work. We'll make it work.
To the closed caption,
recording apart from you.
How do I control the view so that only the speaker is on view? Because right now we have Rosanna highlighted for everybody. Who are you seeing?
I'm seeing you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm seeing Rosanna for some reason. Right, friends, let's kick off. We're a bit late, never mind. So we'll start with an invocation and then just launch into our Svadhyaya for this series, the Yoga Sutras. I'd always resisted doing it because I told you in an email, studios like to, host workshops and it helps them maintain their studios. And I didn't want to make it available on my website because that might undermine what the needs of studios. But then I came up with this solution of keeping the videos up for a week. That way you all have access to them if you're on different time zones and you can download them. I don't care what you do with them. But then studios can still have their workshops and, because it's not fair on them if the whole workshop is available free on my website. It's fine with me, but, studios need to make income as well. So for at least the Yoga Sutras and the Gita, we should do a workshop on the Gita, I'm realizing. The videos will only be available for a week. Well, all the rest are up there forever. So all the other Svadhyayas are on my workshop or on the workshop link. Okay. So
I have to interrupt you, Edwin. Make me a host again,
okay.
Please.
So we go into participants and we look for ET, E dot T, there you are, more, and make you a co-host, okay? Make co-host. Why did that stop being the case? I made you a co-host. What happened?
Pulled out.
Are you okay now? Okay. All right, friends. We're off to a bit of a sloppy start, but so the idea then became clear from some of the feedback I was getting from you that we should do all 6 schools of Indian philosophy. So you should all be, or you could all be, or you have the opportunity to be informed consumers of yoga philosophy in the sense of being able to situate it in this broader landscape of the so-called 6 schools of Indian philosophy, which is a fiction. There's so many more schools. I don't know who came up with this idea of 6 schools. Some Brahmin at some point would have come up with it, and somehow it became entrenched. The oldest references we see of doxographies. Doxography means a compilation of philosophical schools, a compilation. Like nowadays, we will have an introduction to Indian philosophy. Let me just log out of my email because it keeps binging. So the oldest doxographies speak of 12 schools, and somewhere else it speaks of 8 schools. So there's nothing hallowed or sacred about the idea of 6 schools of Indian philosophy. As a matter of fact, it's a complete fiction because there's so many more. Where's Tantra? Where are the Shakta traditions? Where are so many different branches and sub-branches? What are the Siddha traditions? So clearly there's more than 6 schools, but it doesn't matter. There's this idea that we have these 6 schools of Indian philosophy within which we find the Yoga Sutras, and all of us are connected in some form or fashion with yoga, and the Yoga Sutras has become the canonical text for Western yoga, like canonical text, whether you think of it that way or not. De facto, in reality, on the ground, just like, Christianity has a Bible and the Jewish traditions have the Old Testament, and Islam has the Quran. So de facto, although we don't think of it that way, don't think of ourselves as being in any way sort of bounded, but the fact is, our canonical texts, the texts that many of us, take as authoritative, or at least take fairly seriously, in a canonical sort of way, are the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. And why? Because, well, the teachers that have taught us whatever we have been taught have presented these texts as authoritative. And because we have respect for these teachers, we've got something from them, we are open to, if they have presented these texts as texts that are useful for our spiritual well-being, we've accepted it in some form of fashion. So most of us, maybe not, we might not be literalists, we're not fundamentalists, that's for sure, but we take these texts seriously. The two texts then that have this, kind of on the ground de facto status as canonical texts are the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. So we are looking at the Yoga Sutras now, and it's situated in as one of the 6 schools, and that's why we're doing a series of workshops on what are these 6 schools. Okay, so finally we've gotten around to the Yoga Sutras. I guess, because I wrote the commentary, I wanted to do other things, but here we are. So let's start with an invocation. Connect with our teachers, connect with Ishvara if you have a samskaric possibility for Ishvara. You can connect just for a moment. Let's put ourselves, we're all students, and we put ourselves in a receptive mode and embrace the possibility that knowledge is descending in the Indian traditions, unlike Western academic knowledge systems are ascending, right? You always have to contribute something. So you're it's growing, it's ever growing. Whereas the Indian traditions tend to see that these truths are as perennial, as eternal, as somehow non-historical, trans-historical. So there's really not very much to add other than to make them relevant according to time and place. But the core truths are considered, that there's an Atman, that Chitta Vritti Nirodha is, at least in terms of the Yoga Sutra, is the method. Doesn't matter whether you're French or Italian, or whether you're born in the 1st century or the 25th century, that these truths continue to always be perennially true truths. That's what a truth is. Okay, so we therefore situate ourselves as recipients, and that's our relationship with the text, most of us, maybe not all, and therefore we offer our minds, we put our minds in a place of receptivity by connecting to our teachers and to Ishvara, if we have that inclination. And the standard way of doing that is through invocation at the beginning of a class. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale, Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Pacharine, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Akanda Mandalakaram, Yena Vyaptam Chara Charam, Tat Padam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya. Apavitra Pavitro Va Sarvavastha Gato Piva Yas Maret Pundarika Ksham Sa Bhayabhyantara Shuchi. Okay, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It's the shortest of the sutras, 198. And what I was thinking we could do today is just look at the first 4 verses. We're all familiar with them. And then look at the broader context. Because Patanjali, what does he start off? What's the first sutra? Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Anushasanam. And Anu means the continuation of the teachings. So the first sutra is Atta, now. And as some of you have heard me say, if you want, there we are. Utter, the first word, and it's the same first word in Vedanta Sutra, Utter, Brahma Jignasa. It's the same in Mimamsa, Utter Dharma Jignasa. So this word utter, now, first word. So now can either mean now in this sutra as opposed to other sutras. Now can also mean and how do we know it can mean all these things? Because the commentators tell us. Everything I'm going to tell you is going to be coming from the commentators. My pedagogy is traditionally situated. In other words, I see myself as a continuation of the lineages, of course, sometimes with examples and analogies and metaphors and references to our modern day and age, which is what all commentators do. But nothing, I'm not adding any Jungian psychology or anything that's not completely embedded in the traditional lineages. So just so you know. So utter then the commentators will take to be, now you have a human form, you can do yoga. Utter can mean now in many different ways, and commentators love to spin theological meaning from each word. So what does a commentary do? It takes each word of a sutra and examines it, analyzes it, gives you synonyms for it so you know precisely what it means, and then spins out theological meaning, maybe finds the same word referred to in other texts and makes connections like that. And the commentators, when it comes to the first word, as what some commentators say, utter means, now in this sutra. Other commentators will say, well, now you have a human form of life after who knows how many births as animals, the Atman being eternal. And as you know, the whole samsara means sort of cycling through the various species of life. And if you think of how many species of life there are, even though we have 7-8 billion, that's a fraction. If you think of all the microbes, the bacteria, the blades of grass, the ants, there's trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of living entities. So 7 billion compared to trillions and trillions and trillions is exceedingly rare. If you accept the Buddhist, Jain, Hindu belief that life, consciousness, that which is consciousness, which is alive, and they have the defining features of life, are birth, growth, production of offspring. I forget what the 6 are, but they actually overlap with modern definitions of what constitutes life. How do you define life? And therefore something is live, it is chit. And it's distinct from that, which is achit, non-conscious. So therefore the question is, if something is conscious, what is that? What is the quality that makes it conscious? And then the Jnana traditions of India then identify the Atman. Okay, the Jnana meaning the Vedanta, the Upanishads. These are the Jnana traditions. Jnana meaning knowledge, and they present knowledge as to what is the self. Who are we? That fundamental, basic 101. Day one in first day of philosophy school, right? Who am I? Right. The answer to that question in the Jnana traditions, and they arrive at it in their different ways, by logic, by inference, by scriptural analysis. But the grand finale, kind of common denominator of Jnana is that we are not the bodies, we are not the minds, we are not prakritic, we're not, therefore it's not, it's in the point of view of modern philosophy, it's not, the moksha traditions, if you believe in moksha, liberation traditions, all of them, common denominator, something survives death. And if something survives death, then that thing is not a material entity. So that thing, that is the chit, that is the conscious, the self. So that's jnana. And of course, there are different sort of understandings of precisely what the self is. It is an individual. Is it going to merge into Brahman? That's not a topic for our, Patanjali takes the view that the self is individual. So utter, the first word then, means now, after trillions and trillions, could mean, Patanjali doesn't say this, he just says utter. This is the job of the commentators. What does utter mean? What does now mean? Now as opposed to when? You can't just say now. Now, it doesn't stand by itself. Now is a word that implies a not now, some other temporal or some other kind of condition. So if you're a philosopher, if you're a theologian, if you're a commentator, you have to account for this. Now means what? Now as opposed to what? So that's your job. You have to analyze things, these sutras, in the most minute detail. So there's absolutely no questions left. There's absolutely no, of course there always are, because time changes and our questions are going to be very different from the questions that the students that might have sat at the feet of Patanjali in the forest of ancient India, which is how I like to envision him in my imagination. So Atta then, for a number of commentators, both here and in Vedanta, the same word, Atta means, well, you've had trillions and trillions and trillions, infinite past lives. And since there's trillions and trillions of living entities, and they're just like you and me, and we were once, who knows, bacteria, viruses, or anything that's alive. So now we have the human form of life. Atato, hang on, that's Vedanta, sorry. Atta yoga anushasanam. Now, as opposed to when, as opposed to non-human forms, now yoga anushasanam, we can follow, there can be the continuation of yoga teachings, because other forms cannot do, their intellects do not have sufficient sattva, even though their atmans are equal to ours. Non-human forms karmically are bound by minds, the same minds that we have, but their minds are, the tamasic element is more dominant, and that does not allow existential pursuit of knowledge, scientific investigation, existential puzzlement, who am I, why am I here, those kinds of big ticket questions. Only the human form allows that, has enough sattva. The animals are completely conditioned karmically simply to focus on the basic needs of survival and reproduction and so forth, and defense, until the souls in those forms get to the human body. So Atta can mean all of that packed in. Number one. Number two, Atta can also mean, have you learnt about the Atman? Have you studied Vedanta? Have you read the old Upanishads where the rishis are telling us, seek that, Shvetaketu. You are that. All of these beautiful Upanishads that are not philosophical have been handed down for millennia. Have you studied them? Have you then studied the Vedanta, which sets about systematizing the Upanishads and in a more philosophical way? Have you studied all that? Are you now convinced that there is an Atman? Have you studied Nyaya? Those of us who did the Nyaya course, one of the sections was proof of the Atman. Have you studied it logically? Have you studied it scripturally? Have you studied it through these various epistemological possibilities? And are you now in a place where you believe that your intellect, not belief, but your intellect has rationally come to the conclusion that accepting an Atman is more rational than other options, like thinking that my consciousness is simply matter, and when I die, that's the end of it? Have you looked at the flaws of alternative options as to what constitutes consciousness? And Nyaya is the school that engages that its function amongst the six schools is to use reason to suggest, to argue that belief in an Atman is more philosophically rational and coherent than other possibilities like non-belief in an Atman. So have you done all of that work? Have you done, and that's basically jnana work. Have you done your jnana work? Have you come to the position that, yes, I am not this body, I'm something else in my deepest level, I'm consciousness, I survived death. Now you're ready to, okay, you come to that point, now do you want to experience it? So Atta can mean all of that. So Atta yoga now, in the human form, now you've done your jnana studies, now yoga anushasanam. Now we can continue the old teachings of yoga. And what I was hoping to do today is, when you say continue the teachings, anu means to continue. Well, continue from where? Continue from what? And so partly what I wanted to do today is introduce the first 4 verses and then look at where, look at some of the older texts where we see this kind of yoga, the Patanjalian kind of yoga, where we see that same thing prior to Patanjali, where we see it outlined. And so we'll be having a quick peek at the Katha Upanishad and the Shveta Upanishad. That's part of our project today. What have in store, although we've already gone through half an hour, but we'll do it. And so that's part of what I was hoping we would do today, the first day. Look at what yoga actually is. Look at what is the Anu, what is it being continued from, what are the older texts, number 2. Number 3, what I was hoping to fit in today is, what do the other schools have to say about yoga? So we'll have a quick look at the Nyaya Sutras, which are the rationalists. They dedicate themselves to arguing that there is an Atman in the first place. And then they hand over and say, at the very end, after they've done all the work, at the 4th chapter of Nyaya, end of the text, they say, okay, we did our job. We pushed reason as far as it could go to establish that there is an Atman, that against the materialist view, against the momentary view of the Buddhists, because the Nyaya are one of the Buddhists accept, they're not materialists, Buddhists are not materialists, they accept consciousness as non-material, but Buddhists consider it to be not eternal, not sat, but momentary. So Nyaya has to respond to that. So after the end of it, when they've done all their work, then they say, oh, and by the way, if you want to experience it, then do yoga. So they hand over the baton to yoga. So we'll have a quick look at that verse, and then we'll have a quick look at Vedanta, Ramanuja's Vedanta, where he says, well, we object to yoga in terms of causation of the universe. Their understanding of Ishvara is a little bit deficient, but everything else we accept. So we'll have a quick look at the other schools, what they say about yoga. And then we'll finally look at the Gita, where Gita says there's 2 kinds of yoga. The Patanjalian yoga, which is inaction yoga, and the action yoga. And we'll have we'll just have a quick look, but we should do a whole workshop on the Gita. So that basically the job today is to establish what yoga is in Patanjali, and then sort of situate that in the greater landscape of what yoga is, what it was before Patanjali, what other schools think about it, what the Gita thinks about it. And if we get all that done, I think that's a pretty fair evening's work. And then the rest of the workshop will plow on. And we will have some time at the end to do the more obscure verses that we usually don't get covered, maybe in chapter 4. I'm quite happy to extend the series. I can't remember if I said it was going to be 6 or 7, but I'm quite happy to extend it as long as there's interest. Okay, so that's the plan. My goodness, and there's 223 of you. So Nyaya, there was only 23 for Nyaya. But listen, if you please consider doing the Nyaya Sutra workshop. I was terrified. I thought nobody, now there was more than, there was probably 40 people. But it turned out to be, I think, really enlivening and invigorating. And it wasn't boring at all. And I'll tell you why we need to do Nyaya. So the first sutra, I'll finish that sentence in a minute. Eleonora, Atta Yoganushasanam, so now, Patanjali says now, with all of what I just said about the possible meanings of now, number 1, now we have the human form of life after who knows how many births, groveling about brutally in this brutal, vicious, nasty cycle of samsara, where the 4-legged eat the 2-legged, and the 2-legged, there's this whole thing in one of the Dharma Sutras. It's a brutal, it's fairly brutal, the survival of species, I suppose. Even Darwinistically, it's brutal, but even from an ancient Indian perspective. Okay, so now the Anushasanam, Shas is to teach, right? So you have a Shastra is a sacred text. It's called a Shastra. Okay, so the Gita is a Shastra, and all of the Yoga Sutras plus all the commentaries is called the Yoga Shastra. So Shas means to teach. The teacher is Shastri. So if you teach a sacred text, you're a Shastri. And that's the verb. You see the Shas in the middle there? Anu means to continue. Now, what is this yoga? That is going to continue. Okay, so the first sutra in all of these sutra traditions, or as far as I can remember, they start off introducing the subject matter. Okay, so Vedanta is Atta Brahma Jignasa. Now we're going to inquire into Brahman. Yoga is not going to do that. Yoga is going to assume we've already done that. You've done your Svadhyaya. You know about Brahman and Atman. So the subject is introduced, and notice it's a continuation. Patanjali is not claiming to be presenting something new. You cannot be an orthodox Vaidika. Let's be clear about this. If you're an orthodox Brahmana like Patanjali or I'm sorry, like Guruji Iyengar or a Krishnamacharya, if you situate yourself as a Vaidika teacher, you can never really present yourself as teaching anything new. By definition, you are continuing the lineages of the eternal Veda and the Vedic corpus. You can make it relevant to time and place. You can take seeds that are underdeveloped or non-developed, that they have to be there in the Upanishads. You can take seeds and develop them, but you have to sort of somehow come up with a story, find a way, even with asanas, all these asanas you're all doing. You have to find a peg, and that's why we're all studying the Yoga Sutras, because there's 3 verses that speak about asana. That's all you need. Then you're orthodox. Then you're Vaidika. You can say, okay, Patanjali mentions asana. It's a seed. He doesn't really, he just sort of mentions it, and we are going to take that seed and expand it into the hundreds of asanas that we're doing on our high streets and main streets. But the seed, the origin of it, the proto-asana has to be mentioned in a Vedika text in order for any teacher to present him or herself as orthodox Vedika. If you don't want to be orthodox Vedika, then you go and start your own thing, like the Buddha did, like Krishnamurti did, like Rajneesh did. Nothing stopping you doing that, but you can't then say you're a Vedika. And if it's important for you to consider yourself not as coming up with something new, if you consider truth to be eternal, after all, if there is a God, it's eternally a God. If there's an Atman, there's eternally an Atman. And if karma is like gravity, it's an eternal law for all times and places. It transcends, any social context. So if you believe these truths to be eternally true, then you're going to see yourself as presenting eternal teachings. In this case, Vedic teachings. So and you're going to defend that position. If a truth is eternal, then it's eternally true. Then it's always been true. So then it's logical that previous sages and rishis would have encountered that truth and experienced the truth and taught the truth and handed it down. It makes sense that there's a body of knowledge that has come down across the millennia. If truth is eternal, and if we allow that great beings have experienced it, then what's new? You might go into finer details like subatomic structures and string theory, but essentially your basic truths are going to remain basic. Okay, so Anushasanam, continuing the old teachings. Patanjali is not presenting himself as having a enlightenment experience under a Bodhi tree like the Buddha did. He's not presenting himself like that. He's going to say, no, I'm teaching the teachings, I'm teaching a truth that's always been true. And that's the truth that there's an Atman. And there's the truth that you can experience it by Chittavritti Nirodha. It's got nothing to do with time or place or Bodhi trees or India or Himalayas or LA or, Sunset Boulevard. It's got nothing to do with any of that. These are eternal truths. So therefore, what is one of these eternal truths? That yogash is Chittavritti Nirodha. And there's a typo in that second line. It should be Nirodha. That there's this thing called yoga, and the definition of it is the stilling nirud. So the verb is nirud. Rud is to stop, to block, and ni is just a prefix to nirud, nirodhana. That yoga is the stilling. Okay, nirodhana. I think I know I've done so many workshops on the Yoga Sutras. I hear myself repeating myself. It doesn't matter. So what? pedagogy is repetition. And if metaphors work, then why not repeat them? If analogies work, why not repeat them? If you encounter a roadblock in Delhi, they call it a nirodhana, because it's stopping the flow of something that would otherwise be flowing. So therefore, when they came up with roadblocks, right? Whenever they came up with them, 50 years ago, 100, 60 years ago, whatever, and they had to have a name for them, right? They come up with something new, so they have to call it something. So they say, oh, let's call it call it a nirodhana. But it gives you a good sense of the meaning of the word, outside of the Yoga Sutras. Traffic wants to flow. That's its natural inclination. That's the nature of a roadway, is that it allows traffic to flow without stopping. But then you put a nirodhana there and it blocks it. It stops the flow. So the yoga is the blocking of the flow of something. Of what? The vritti, the flow, the revolving. It's a flow. Well, literally, vrit means to turn. Because why turning? Because there's a chitta, and a thought comes out of a samskara. There's no magic. Any thought, nothing is produced, or there's only recycling in the universe. I think physicists would quite happily agree with that. There isn't any magic. Things are not produced from nothing. So therefore, thought, like anything else, is a material thing. It's a subtle kind of material, whatever you want. A thought is like an image, a mental image. Well, it has to come from something. So it comes from a samskara. And a samskara in its turn has to come from something. Well, it comes from the contact of a sense and a sense object. So you see a tree, and that tree has to come from somewhere. Well, where does it come from? And then if you keep tracing things back to their essence, you end up with the three gunas, the stop sign. Everything is just a permutation of the three gunas. So one permutation of the three gunas manifests as a sense object, like a tree. Other permutations of the gunas, more sattvic in nature, manifest as our minds and our sense equipment, our sense apparatus. So we have these senses, and the sense of eye, for example, sees the tree. So the gunas are contacting the gunas. There's a lovely verse in the Gita. There's nothing other than the gunas contacting the gunas. Krishna says, whether you sit, you eat, you sleep, you defecate, I think he says that. Whatever it is, it's just the gunas interacting with the gunas. But the consciousness is the one that is aware of them. Consciousness is of a completely different nature. There's a dualism in yoga and Sankhya between the chit and the achit, the conscious and the non-conscious. Okay, so what is a vritti? It is the sense of the sattvic element in the eye sees the tamasic form of the tree. It makes an imprint. That's transmitted whatever way that this happens, light bouncing off retinas, whatever it is. But in the yoga tradition, it makes an imprint on a mind which is different from the brain. So you have a mind, and now that samskara is the mind, that samskara in the mind, along with lots of millions and trillions of other samskaras, come together and they form thoughts. So thoughts have as their grounding, have as their basis, ultimately samskaras. Even abstract conceptual thought is ultimately grounded in empiricism. Even something like, pi r squared, it's grounded in, a perception of a circle, for example. So ultimately things have to be grounded in empirical, and then from sense perception, then you make inferences. And abstract thinking is basically inferential in nature. So I would think, I'm going to throw it out there, and then I'll think about it more tonight. That mathematics and all, even these sort of theoretical, abstract ways of engaging the mind and schematizing and construing reality are ultimately inferential, and they piggyback off empirical data. So, and then these form thoughts. So we either think in, just about the tree and its color and it aesthetically, and we can have vrittis like that. Is the text not up, Eleonora? Did you take it down? So we either can, we can either just our thinking can just be empirically based, or it can be aesthetic, or we can start getting philosophical, a tree, what does it consist of, or scientific, and start thinking about its components. But these are all vrittis coming from ultimately grounded in sense perception. And they are lodged in the chitta. So the chitta is never defined by Patanjali. And I think the reason it's never defined is in and of itself, it's just a storehouse. And it's like the ocean, you really know the ocean because you see the waves, you see the surface, you perceive its externals. Of course, you can dive into it and see other aspects of the ocean, just like you can with the chitta. You can dive into it and perceive, latent sanskaras, vasanas. Yogis have access to their past lives. But essentially, the chitta, it's nothing other than the samskaras. So it's some kind of a medium. Sankhya likes to think of it as buddhi, manas, and ahankara, sort of divides it up into three. And yoga accepts that because yoga is Sankhya. Yoga is not, before this idea of 6 schools became fossilized, yoga in the earlier doxographies, remember doxography is a compilation of Indian, of philosophical schools. So the Buddhists, they said, they wrote doxographies. They said, okay, when, what in the 6th century, I think is the earliest one. I think it was a Buddhist who, who wrote down what at his time and in his sphere of information, what were the schools he was aware of. And I think, one doxography, the earliest has, I can't remember, 12 schools, others had 16 schools, others have 8. I don't have the exact number at my fingertips. So in those earlier doxographies, there wasn't yoga separate from Sankhya. There was only Sankhya. And even in the Yoga Sutras, we know nothing about what Patanjali's talking about in half these sutras, more than half. We are dependent on the commentary of Vyas. The first commentator is Vyas. Some scholars even say, and I'm not sure I'm convinced about this at all, but Philip Maas, M-A-A-S, and he's a good scholar and a serious scholar, and he needs to be taken seriously. But I just personally, I'm not convinced by his argument because it's based on, to me, rather slender evidence. But he thinks Vyas is Patanjali himself writing a commentary on himself under the name of the great Vyas. Who was the great Vyas? And he's kind of just appropriating this figurehead Vyas, because Vyas is kind of like this, he's even a partial Anksha incarnation of Narayana. He divided the one Veda into 4. He took the one Purana and divided it into 18. He's the author of the Mahabharata. You might have probably encountered him as the author of the Mahabharata, or at least the person who wrote it down. So a recent argument has emerged, one academic, Philip Maas, that Vyas, the first commentator, is really Patanjali writing a commentary on his own sutras. And I question that, first of all, because it's not a typical thing. Where else do you find that? Indians are very conservative. They don't just, Brahmins are very conservative. Ancient Brahmanas are, they're fairly conservative. And they don't just, I don't know of other instances where someone writes a sutra and then writes a commentary under some other name. I'm not aware of any other instance of that. So right there, I would find it rather implausible. But also the evidence isn't strong, but it doesn't matter. The point I'm making is we can't understand Patanjali except through Vyas, except through the commentary. Okay, so Vyas doesn't. So the commentators don't. So Patanjali doesn't tell us, doesn't define chitta. The commentators then take it to be the manas and the buddhi and the ahankara of Sankhya, the mind, intelligence, where Sankhya likes to sort of take the chitta and divide it into 3 different functions. This sort of intelligence, the guiding mechanism, the mind, which is sorting through all the information. And I suppose the samskaras, would they be lodged in the manas or the buddhi? It's a good question. I looked this up once. I want to say buddhi, but it doesn't really matter. But anyway, the samskaras are lodged in the chitta. So what is the chitta? Nothing other than, elsewhere it's called the ashaya, the reservoir, the ashaya, the resting place, the place where things rest. It doesn't have a function of its own, chitta, other than it's a storehouse for all the samskaras. And by the way, we have our samskaras from every single past life, because the subtle body, the Atman keeps the same subtle body forever until it gets liberated. And then Patanjali says in chapter 2, it goes back to its source. So what is yoga? It is the stilling of these samskaras that emerge ceaselessly and endlessly as thoughts. We're constantly thinking in the waking stage. 4 states of consciousness we learn from the Mundaka, or the Mandukya. It was getting muddled up. The Mandukya. There is the waking consciousness, dream consciousness, deep sleep consciousness, and the 4th, which Patanjali is going to say in the next verse. What is the 4th? Drashtu Sarupe Vastanam, the seer abiding in its own nature. But let's just finish up verse 2. So there are 4 states of consciousness, and in the waking consciousness, samskaras are being generated because you're awake and your senses are active, and everything your senses contact generates samskaras, which feed back into the chitta, which are then ingredients for your vrittis, for your thoughts. And in dream, those same samskaras, but you don't have so much control over them. They come together as dream. And in deep sleep, that consciousness is still conscious. It doesn't go to sleep, but the mind is in a state of tamas, of stillness. The 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. I'm going to assume most of you know what they are. If not, do a little, because we don't have much time, just go into Wiki or anywhere and look under the 3 gunas, Gunas, sattva, 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 rajas, and tamas. Okay, these are what matter is. Matter is made of these 3 things. Okay, tamas is the heavy lethargic aspect of matter, like metal and earth, solids. Rajas is more energy, fire, and so forth. And sattva is more airy, lighter. And in the mind, of course, and yoga is interested in the mind rather than metaphysics out there, of the world out there. Sankhya is interested in the world out there. But yoga then, the mind, when it's tamasic, it's deep sleep. When it's awake and tamasic, it's depressed, it's sleepy, it's violent, it's resentful, it's envious. These are the tamasic qualities. And rajas is desire, unlimited. Rajas, raga, rajas, the same word, same Sanskrit root. Things to do, places to go, people to meet. Rajas is energy in physics, but in psychology, it's ambition, it's greed, it's passion, it's desire. It's and sattva is interest in truth, detachment, realizing the futility of chasing illusory desires, and sattva is the interest in knowledge. It's the ability to see sameness in everybody. As I am, so are others, and from that comes empathy, because I'm the same as everyone else, and if someone is suffering, well, that's me, and from that comes compassion. So these higher qualities, compassion, knowledge, detachment, recognition that a simple life is a life, a peaceful life, and that happiness comes from a peaceful mind. Okay, so now yoga, all of that, whether your vrittis is a sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, even your enlightened vrittis, even your vrittis of compassion and love and affection and all this high level stuff, yoga is to nirodha them all. 100%, not 99.9, because if there's one vritti in the mind, then consciousness is going to latch onto it. Think of a magnet. If you take away, if there's iron filings in front of the magnet will attract the iron filings. You can take away a million iron filings, but if there's one, it will latch onto the magnet. So, therefore, yoga is the stilling of all vrittis, revolvings, fluctuations. Literally, vrit is to revolve. Why revolve? Because it comes from a samskara. A thought comes from a samskara, manifests as thought, and then the thought itself goes back into the chitta and becomes its own samskara. It comes from a samskara, right? You saw the tree. But when you think about the tree, you're going to add up other sorts of things to your thinking of the tree. You're going to be thinking about it, its shape. You're going to say it looks like a this or a that, or it's very green, or the buds are coming out. So your original samskara, which triggers the tree, is going to be embellished as it rises in your mind as a thought. Then that very thought then goes back and becomes its own samskara. And so then you can go and retrieve it later on and say, what was I thinking about? And pull out pull out that thought. And when you pull it out, you're going to be embellishing it again. It's going to change again, and it's going to morph, and it's going to be, and so on ad infinitum. But yoga is to nirodha all of that. It's a radical proposition, my friends. Completely and utterly still, any movement of thought. And tada kim bhavati. What happens if you do it? Why would I want to do this? Well, we won't get the answer that question. Why would I want to do it? Why is this a rational, reasonable, attractive proposition to still all thoughts? Why would anybody suggest that one do such a thing? You won't get an answer to that question until chapter 2, when we talk about suffering. Right now, he's just telling you what is yoga. What happens then? Yoga is the Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Memorize that. If you haven't, make a t-shirt, sell it in your studio and walk around with it. Yoga. And why is it yogash? It's really yogaha. Yogaha is the nominative singular of the noun yoga. In the nominative singular becomes aha. But aha, when it's followed by a palatal sound like ch, just a Sanskrit rule, not by a g, not by a d, not by a b, but by a ch or a j, then the aha sound becomes a sibilant, sh. So that's why it's yogash chitta vritti nirodha. Okay? But really it's yogaha, which is the nominative singular of yoga. Don't be afraid of Sanskrit. You should all learn Sanskrit, my friends. Why tell yourself the story you can't do that? What a wonderful thing to fit into this life. What a wonderful thing to fit into this life, my friends. Learning this beautiful, wonderful language, and then you get close to these texts. There's so many things we fit into this life. Why is that an unrealistic proposition? We learn musical instruments, we learn sports, we go to the gym, we do all of this stuff. Why can't we learn Sanskrit? Tell me. If there's some deep-rooted metaphysical reason we can't do that? It's a wonderful thing to do with your mind, my friends, for the rest of your life. And maybe it will save you from senility and dementia. And I'm not kidding, actually. It'll keep your brain active because you'll never master it. So you keep going. Okay. And there's, so back to the thing. Where's the text? So what happens when Chitta Vritti Nirodha, tada, then, tada, literally, there is the avasthanam, the situatedness. I know we don't say that in English, but that's what it means. The avasthanam is in English, we'd have to say something like the state of being situated. But literally, it's the situatedness or the state of being situated, sva, rupe, in its own nature. Rupa is nature, form, essence. There is the state of being situated in its own nature of what? Drashtahu, the seer, genitive. The ending, you're going to see this 3 times in the sutras, this word, but not with the same ending. Sanskrit is an Indo-European declining language, my friends. What does declining language means? That depending on whether it's the subject of a sentence, the object of a sentence, right? Nominative, dative, accusative, genitive, the ending changes. That's why you have Om Namo Shivaya. It's Shiva. Well, what's his Shivaya? Is it like his girlfriend, his missus? The Shiva and Shivaya? No, Shivaya is the dative case, 2 of Shiva. So Sanskrit, the ending changes. We don't do that in English, except in the plural. We've kept the old S for the plural, books. That's an old Indo-European ending, goes back 5,000 years, probably, at least. Otherwise, we've lost it. The declensions. And we have prepositions instead. We say anyway. Let's not get into this. So then, when there is when the mind, the chitta, the vrittis of the chitta have been nirodhahed, right? At least learn these three words, my friends. Nirodha, the stilling of the work backwards. This is a compound. The stilling of the states of this chitta. When that happens, tada, follow the Sanskrit, my friends. Let's get into the text as deeply as we can. We're not excluded from it. You don't have to be a Vedic Brahmana. You don't have to be a Vedic Brahmana. They're just embodied Atmans, just like us. You could argue, okay, they have a good karma, that, you know, fine, they know Sanskrit, they can read the sun, but that doesn't guarantee anything. So don't be afraid of the Sanskrit. It's a form of encapsulating knowledge. So tada, then, there is the situatedness of the seer in its own nature. Now, that means that anyone doing Chittavritti Nirodha has jnana, has already done the jnana homework. That's the utter. Now you've done your homework. Why does it mean that? Because if you do Chittavritti Nirodha, if you're sane, right? If we're sane, rational creatures, and somebody says to us, stop thinking, and we say, oh, okay, why would we possibly agree to do that unless we already were firmly convinced that there is a seer behind the mind? And that if I still the mind, basically removing the mind from the from contact with the consciousness, from distracting consciousness, because the minute a thought arises, consciousness just by its nature gloms onto the thought. Like a magnet by its nature, if there's an iron filing in front of it, it cannot help itself. Its nature as its magnetic force automatically, by the very laws of Prakriti, attracts that iron filing. As that is the case with the magnet, well, consciousness, if something is placed in front of it, automatically becomes conscious of it. If it becomes conscious of that other thing, it is no longer conscious of itself. And therefore, it is not it's not situated, svarupa vastanam, look at the Sanskrit, it isn't situated in its svarupa. And therefore, it's focused on this other object and becomes aware of the other object, whether it's a tree or a thought of a tree, or the thought of pi r squared. Its consciousness is absorbed in the other. When it's absorbed in the other, it's not absorbed in itself. And Vedanta is going to say, Patanjali doesn't, when it becomes absorbed in its own nature, then it finds the ananda that is also part of its nature. Sankhya is not too happy with that, but the idea of Satchid Ananda, that the very nature of the Atman is Sat. Sat is the present active participle. It's always in a state of being, ising. So you could say eternal, but literally Sat means that it never ceases to be. That's Sat. It's present active participle. The English translation is being. Even though we don't have this word in English, you could say ising. It's the ing form, walking, running, talking. It's ongoing. So you're being or ising. So that's what Sat. Chit, it's conscious. That's a word that Patanjali does use. Chitti Shakti. And Ananda he doesn't talk about. Vedanta does. So what happens when the Chitta Vritti is Nirodha? Then there is a situatedness of the seer in its own nature. That means if you're going to do this, it means you believe there's a seer there, my friends. Because you haven't experienced it until you've attained success in Chittavritti Nirodha. So why would you do Chittavritti Nirodha prior, right? You have to, in order to experience it, you have to do Chittavritti Nirodha for quite a prolonged time. Patanjali says Dirgha Kala, a very long time. Nerantarya, with no interruptions. That's a fairly formidable proposition. Why would you do that prior to experiencing it. So therefore, you haven't experienced it. Why are you doing it? Because you believe. What do you believe? That there's a drashtra, a seer. And why would you believe something like that? Because you've studied the Vedanta, because you've studied the Upanishad, because you've done your logic with Nyaya, because you've considered alternatives through hard intellectual work. You've asked yourself the question, who am I? This is the fundamental question of a human being. That separates it from an animal. Who am I? And then you study, whatever you're going to study, Plato, Aristotle, study them all. And then perhaps you end up in the, as many of us have done in the Indian traditions, in the knowledge traditions of ancient India, and we studied it. Okay, we read the sacred text, but maybe that's not enough. Then we study Nyaya, the logicians. And the work of the logician is to say, okay, we are going to defend that Atman that the Upanishads speak about. We're going to defend it, but we will use reason. And the way you go about doing that is, one of the main ways of doing that is you consider the alternatives. If you do not believe in an Atman, then what do you think consciousness is? You then go through the other options of your day and age. Back then, it was the Charvaka materialists and the Buddhist momentary, the Kshanikavadins, those that were not materialist, but believed in momentary consciousness. So then you have to say, well, this is why belief in eternal Atman is more coherent than these other options. And you lay out your arguments. You present the opposing point of view, and you lay out your arguments as to why the proposal of an eternal Atman is a superior. For us in our day and age, our Purva Paksha opposing point of view are the also materialists, but they take the form of whatever it is, the philosophy of mind, that, brain, the idea that, consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, and ultimately, whatever it is, that it comes from some kind of, combination of neurons or whatever you want to say it is, but it's material in its nature. It doesn't matter what form that takes. Then you have, that's our, in our day and age, anybody that wants to perpetuate yoga philosophy has to be then engaging the opposing points of view of our day and age. So if you've done all of that work, you've considered the alternatives, and you come to a place where you think, no, for my samskaras in my mind, the idea that consciousness, which is so fundamentally and completely different from all material things, to say that it somehow magically is an epiphenomenon, but somehow magically it comes from some combination unknown yet, for some kind of material moment in some kind of chemical soup or whatever the proposal is, that if that idea it seems untenable, and the idea that consciousness, being such a completely different thing from any material thing, must itself be not material by its very nature. If you come to that position that consciousness, its source must be a non-material thing, call it a soul, call it an Atman, call it Amagama, then that's jnana. Then you've done your jnana, and you've arrived at a place where you feel, right, you haven't experienced it yet, so you don't know, but you're, to the extent that you can push your reason, and also bolstered by the study of the sacred texts of other mystics and rishis who had claimed to have experienced these truths. They experienced a non-material Atman. You study their works, you look at their lifestyle, you study them, you study the Upanishad. If all of that, that's all jnana. If you've done all of that and finally arrive at the position that I believe in an Atman, not just belief, but my belief is formed by intense jnana work, svadhyaya, then Patanjali says, utter the first word. Now you've done all that. Here's how you can experience it for yourself. And then if you experience it, then you become part of the lineages of great beings, of Jivan Muktas, who keep this knowledge alive across the centuries. Therefore the seer here, until you've experienced it, is the product of your faith in the scriptures, not just faith, but the scriptures have to be coherent. They have to be rationally powerful. And okay, I've said enough. Right, now. So, okay, so now the teachings of yoga, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, then the seer, meaning the drashtu is another word for Atman, but Patanjali wants to be more specific because Atman it's just a name. Whereas the seer gives us more information than just a name, Atman, because the seer is, as the Upanishads say, it's not the eyeball seer, it's the seeing behind the seer. Beautiful verses in the Kata, in the Mundaka. What is the seeing behind seeing? What is the thinking behind thought? What is the hearer behind hearing? In other words, what is consciousness? Because without the Atman, well, the eyeball's still in the head, and light's still refracting off the retina, but there's no seeing. Without the Atman, sound vibrations are going in the same ear. The corpse has an ear. The same sound vibrations are going into the ear of the corpse, but there's no hearing. So therefore, that's one argument that not the best argument, but not the number one on the list, but it's an argument that Nyaya, the logicians, will say, what's the difference between a dead body and a live body? The dead body is exactly the same. Immediately upon death, the color, the composition, the texture, all of the qualities are the same, but there's one quality missing, consciousness. And so therefore, Patanjali is using the word seer. He doesn't want to just use some name that doesn't give any particular information, like Atman, but he wants to very clearly say another word for consciousness. Okay? So, and if then the consciousness, the seer, the ability to see, or consciousness, the chitti shakti, the power of consciousness, right? Shakti, in chapter 4, he's going to call it chitti shakti. Shak is something which allows you to do something. A shak is shak in Hindi is sakta hu, main nahi sakta hu. Aap sakte hai? Can you do something? Haan, main to kar sakta hu. I can do something. So even in Hindi, the shak becomes a sakta. Shakta, main kar sakta hu. The sh becomes a sa. So it's the ability to do something. And a shakti is a power that is an essence that allows you to do something. So therefore you have, siddhi shaktis, you have various shaktis. In fact, the pranas are sometimes called shaktis, the 10 pranas. We think of 5, but often they're called 10. And the indriyas of Sankhya, the Gyan Indriyas, the Karma Indriyas, the Sankhya calls them Indriyas, but in some texts they call them Shaktis, because the eye allows you to see it. So it's a Shakti, it's Shak, it enables sight, and the ear enables. So these are Shaktis, but what Shakti is it that allows you to, what Shakti is it that allows you to know anything? All of the above. Who's the thinker behind thought? Who's the seer behind seeing? Who's the hearer behind hearing, the Upanishads ask us. So that Shakti has to be a primordial Shakti. That's Chitti Shakti. That's the Shakti that underpins all other Shaktis. So therefore, the seer then, also known as Chitti Shakti later on, then the seer is situated Swarupe in its own nature. And if it's not doing that, what's it doing? What's seeingness? And remember, this isn't eyeball seeing. This is seeing as a metaphor for consciousness itself, that which allows us to be aware. What is it doing if it's not in its sva, in the middle, sva, its own rupa, its own nature? Well, where is it doing then? It is vritti sarupyam. It is one in nature, in form with the vrittis. It's absorbed in the vritti. When something is absorbed in something else, it takes the form of that other thing, isn't it? When you're absorbed in your television, your mind is absorbed. It takes the form of the characters. You're basically in, your consciousness takes that form. If you're absorbed in your book, your consciousness is absorbed in whatever the narrative of the book is. So therefore, sarupyam means one in form with. The best translation for it is to be absorbed. So when you do chitta vritti nirodha, then the sea abides its own nature. But itaratra, otherwise, itaratra, if it's not doing that, then it's absorbed in the vrittis. Those are the two options for consciousness, my friends. Absorbed in its own nature or absorbed in the vrittis. Even bhakti. You want your vrittis to be all Bhagavan vrittis, Bhagavan, Bhagavan, Krishna, 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 Shiva, Shiva, Shiva. But those are vrittis. Eventually you want to be absorbed in the real Krishna, will manifest beyond the vrittis. But to get there, you have to use the mind to get anywhere, my friends, including to have a Svarupa experience. Who's Narodaing the mind in Chittavritti Naroda? Who's the Naroda? Patanjali calls it a Naroda samskara. The mind stills the mind. When you're sitting meditating and your mind gets distracted, and then a voice in the mind says, "Oh, get back to your Om, get back to your mantra." Well, what's that little voice then? That's the Nirodha Samskara. So we're trapped by the mind. We are trapped by the mind. You can't get out except through the mind. Be clear about that. Whatever you want to do, you only have the mind. You want to enjoy the world, the mind is going to direct you how to do that, boga. The desires of the mind, based on the samskaras, based on its experiences, it's going to have a version of what constitutes happiness in the world. You want to get out, the mind. You want to do bhakti, the mind. You want to cultivate jnana, the mind. Krishna says the mind is your friend or your enemy. Patanjali says here, verse number 5, the vrittis are klishta or aklishta. The vrittayaha, panchatayaha, but they're klishta or aklishta. They are coming from the kleshas, klishta, ignorance, ego, desire, aversion, fear of death, or the akleshas. What's the opposite? The opposite of the kleshas. Opposite of ignorance is knowledge. Opposite of ego is pure ego, real ego. I am an Atman, Brahmasmi, the real Asmi. I am Brahman. The opposite of raga is vairagya, without raga. Or else, raga for the Atman, raga for Krishna, raga nuga bhakti. Mumuksha, desire for liberation. These are aklishta vrittis. So people don't pay enough attention to this. The vrittis are klishta or aklishta. Of course, we have to nirodha them all in Patanjali, not in the other yoga systems. But Krishna's going to say in Gita, I'm going to give you another way where you don't have to nirodha the oh, I got to throw a log in the fire. Hang on a second. Give me 1 second. It's getting chilly. Okay, so that's what yoga is, okay? And I want to go into some of these other texts at 7:15. You know what, we can do this as long as we want to. I don't care. If there's interest, we can make I don't mind doing the series for as many sessions as you guys want. Right. Could we get the Katha Upanishad, please? So, Anushasanam.
Is that big enough?
Yes. Now, what Patanjali is saying that he's Anushasanam. He's continuing the teachings. Continuing. Can you make it bigger, Eleonora, do you think? So these Upanishads predate Patanjali. Okay? So, here we have it. Verse 9. His appearance is beyond the range of sight. You can't see the Atman. No one can see him with his sight. You can't see the consciousness. We know that. We know we're conscious. We can't see it. There's no, this is with the heart, with insight, with thought, has he be contemplated, right? You can think of, well, what am I? I can't be, I'm not my hand. I must be something other than atoms, because atoms are not conscious. I can pull some atoms out of my skin. If there's some particular combination of atoms that cause consciousness or subatomic or some you know, then locate it, find it, demonstrate it. In the absence of that, the position of yoga is no, consciousness comes from a non-material substratum. Okay, no one can see him with his sight. You'll never find consciousness with a microscope. Scientists should continue looking. Of course they should. That's the duty of the Dharma of science. The Dharma of science is to look for material causation. That's the Dharma. So we have no problem with, yogis have no problem with scientists seeking the source of consciousness material in some kind of material ingredients, but yogis would just say you never find it. So, but that quest is perfectly legitimate. It's not only legitimate, it's the Dharma of science to look for material causation for all things. Otherwise, you step out of science and then you enter the realm of metaphysics, or you enter the realm of theology, or you enter the realm of mysticism. Okay, so now here's proto-yoga. Proto means early form of something that's barely mentioned, that's just sort of lightly mentioned. The early form of yoga in the kata. Here it is. Those who know this become immortal. Sat. When the 5 perceptions are still, this is pratyahara. But the Upanishads are much more metaphoric. They don't usually use technical. The sutras introduce technical vocabulary and terminologies and nomenclatures. But the Upanishads are metaphoric. They're not, this is kind of systematic philosophy. It's before systematic philosophy. So when the 5 perceptions are stilled, together with the mind, that's chitta vritti nirodha, when the mind is stilled. You see it? Here it is in the kata. The mind is stilled. Not even reason bestirs itself. No more jnana. No more thinking about Atman. No more making inferences that there must be a soul. No, no, no. You've done all that work. Not even reason bestirs itself. No more Buddhi yoga. They call it the highest state. Who's the they? The sages, those who've experienced it. Whenever there's a they, it's a reference to the rishis. When senses are firmly reined in, pratyahara, my friends, that is yoga, so people think. When the senses are reined in. For distractions, a man is then free. What are distractions? Chitta vritti. No more here's the distraction of the senses, fine. Distraction of the senses, because when the senses, you're not distracted by sounds, by sights, by smells. Normally, we're walking around and we see something, we're distracted. We hear something, we're distracted. We smell something, we're distracted. That's our normal consciousness. But when we rein it all in, then from distractions, what is a distraction? Nothing is pulling consciousness out through the senses. Because you want consciousness to be situated in Svarupa, in Avasthanam, Svarupa Avasthanam. Verse 3, he wants consciousness to be situated in Svarupa. Well, then it can't be situated in the Rupa of something else, can it? It can't be situated in the Rupa of a tree. It can't be situated in the Rupa of some music. It can't be situated in the Rupa of some taste. It wants to be situated in Svarupa. So then you have to rein in the senses. Because as long as the senses are open, they will present distractions, as this text frames it. Okay, for yoga is the coming into being as well as the ceasing to be. I love these Upanishads because they're much more poetic than, the sutras are really dry and kind of, they have to be. They're really just kind of ways of preserving information forever, and they succeed. They've succeeded, my friends. There you are, all sitting in your nice living rooms in the 21st century, all around the world, reading the sutras. So the sutra method of preserving information has succeeded. But its nature, in order to encapsulate, vast amounts of material. I mean, the Yoga Sutras is tiny. The Panini grammar is 5,000 verses. Hang on. Panini grammar is, 4,000 and change verses. All of these are vast masses of information. So the sutras are that particular genre. It's not poetry. It's not epic. It's simply codification. It's like computer codes. Its sole function is preserve information. That's what sutras are doing. And then they get unpacked by the teachers, and then they become made intelligible. Okay, but the Upanishads are not sutras. So so therefore you get this poetry, and it's, you know, for yoga is the coming into being and the ceasing to be. You could say, well, what does that mean? Well, the coming in, what comes into being? Svarupa, consciousness aware of its own nature. And what ceases to be? Chittavritti. What did Patanjali just say? What did we just read? Verse number 3. When you do Chittavritti Nirodha, then what? Tada, then what happens? Drashtu sarupe vasanam. There is the coming into being, if you want to use this language, right? The seer abides in its own true nature. That means its own true nature comes into being, and what ceases to be? The changing states of the mind cease to be. Why do they cease to be? Because you're nirodhering them. So this rather technical, you know, dry way of framing it, which is the dharma of a sutra, can we go back? In the Upanishads is expressed in this more interesting way. Yoga is the coming into being, the sarupa vastam, ceasing to be, right? Down a little bit, if we, thank you, Eleanor. I'm sorry if I'm barking out orders. I get all excited because I love these texts so much. Not by speech, not by the mind, not by sight can he be grasped, okay? Your mind, if you study logic with the logicians, your mind can be satisfied that belief in an Atman is more coherent than alternatives, but you can't grasp it that way. You can infer that there must be an Atman, and you do that by one way you do that is by considering alternative views. But you can't grasp it. So not by speech, not by mind, not by sight can he be grasped. How else can he be perceived other than saying he is? It is. That's what Sat is. Sat, Asti, Asti, Brahmasmi. That's one of the Mahavakyas of the entire Upanishads in Shankara. He picks out 4 sayings from all of this huge body of the Upanishads, and they're called Mahavakyas, great sayings. And a great saying is just 2 or 3 words that encapsulates the essence of an entire text. Okay? So Brahmasmi is one of Shankara's 4. I am Brahman. Brahman asmi, Brahmasmi. That's a Mahavakya. Here it is. He is. Asti. What else are you going to say? What else can you say? Anything else you throw at it is a vritti. And vrittis come from samskaras. And samskaras come from, what did we just say? Contact of a sense with a sense object. A sense cannot, the Atman is not a sense object for the senses. It cannot be, the senses cannot contact Atman because it's finer than the senses. Just like the eye cannot, even material things, the eye cannot see air. The eye cannot see the mind. You know you have a mind. You can't see it with the eyeball. So even within Prakriti, gross things cannot contact or grasp subtler things. Well, what to speak of the subtlest thing of all then? Atman. So therefore, the senses can't read, right? Not by speech, not by the mind, not by sight can he be grasped. What else can you do? You do Chittavritti Nirodha, and then you know he is. In just 2 ways can he be perceived. By saying he is, by affirming he's the real, that Sanskrit is Sat. To one who perceives him as he is, it becomes clear that he's real. That's the only way, is to do Chittavritti Nirodha. Otherwise, it's always going to be faith mind. You might have strong jnana. You might have deep jnana, amazing erudition, but until you've seen it, all of your erudition and jnana is just a high-level Chittavritti. Very sattvic Chittavritti. It's not a bad thing. We have to go through that. But until we've perceived it, and that me included, I haven't perceived it. Until we've perceived it, then it's not real. To one who perceives him, right? The drashtra. Why Patanjali uses the seer, the same verb, drish. To one who perceives him as he is, it becomes clear that he's real. When they're all banished, those desires lurking in one's heart. This is the vairagya. How do you nirodha the mind? Vairagya, got to be vai, without, raga, all of those desires, all of them, all of them, all of them. Whether drashta anushravika, Patanjali, whether you've heard about them or you've experienced them, you've got to be free of them all of them, because if there's one desire, my friends, one, consciousness is going to be absorbed in that. So, you know, we all have to go through this process, this gradual process of vairagya. We're all on the road. We all have to encourage each other. And this is our sangha, this is our community, a yoga community. All those desires, the heart means the mind, the chitta. Then a mortal becomes immortal and attains Brahman in this world, okay? When the knots are all cut, the desires, all right? That bind one's heart on earth. That's all reincarnation is. Nothing other than desire. Nothing other, that's all. As long as there's desires, there's action. As long as there's action, there's reaction. As long as there's reaction, there's reincarnation. Simple. As long as there's reincarnation, you get born in whatever you are. You're man, woman, American, whatever the heck. Okay? Right. So this is proto. Patanjali says Anushasanam. He's continuing the teachings from where? From here. Let's have a quick look at the Shweta, please. And maybe make that bigger, if possible. If we can get rid of the sidebar. Oh, can I do it? Oh, hang on, I can do it, can't I? No. Right. If we can scroll down a tiny bit. Here, stop. Thank you. 8. When he keeps his body straight. Oh, my friends, what the heck is that other than proto-asana? What's all this asana business? It's all about keeping your body straight. Why do you have to keep it straight? Because if you slouch, you fall asleep, don't we? We fall asleep. All of the asanas in classical yoga, pre-modern yoga, pre-transplanted yoga, the goal of asanas is to keep the spine straight. Because the mind, yoga is about, Patanjali yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, stilling the mind. Where is this mind? It's in the body. So if you're going to still the mind, well, the mind's in the body. You've got to do something with the body first, haven't you? Before you start fiddling about with the mind. So then you have asana. And the goal of the grand finale goal of which, that you put the body in a state where it's not going to distract the mind. That's it. If you slouch, you fall asleep. Finished. Yoga, fail. If you fidget, pins and needles, uncomfortable, mind gets distracted. So the grand finale is keeping the body straight with the 3 sections erect. And you draw the senses together. That's pratyahara. With the mind into the heart. Pratyahara is just an Upanishadic way of talking about pratyahara. A wise man shall cross all the frightful rivers. This is samsara. All the rivers of desires, prompting action, prompting reaction. With the boat consisting of that formulation, Om. This is Om. Brahman, Om. Here we have pranayama, compressing his breaths in here and curbing his movements. Because if you're going to move, you need a vritti. So if you're moving from one asana to another asana, my friends, what is the prompt? You're in one asana and then you go into another. Well, your mind is directing that. That means your mind is vrittiing then. You cannot go from one asana to another asana and be in a state of chitta vritti nirodha. No, you have to be in one pose. I'll be clear about that. Because the minute you change a pose, well, it's not, your body's not changing by itself. It's getting a directive. It's getting an instruction from the mind. Okay, change. Well, then you're vrittiing then, aren't you? If you change from one pose to another. So then you cannot attain nirbija samadhi, which is another word for svarupa vastanam, changing from one pose to another. You have to stay in one pose with the back erect and then the mind can disconnect from the body. And you train the body so that it can be in a perfect state that the mind can disconnect from it. That is the role of asana in classical yoga. So, right, curbing his movements, no moving anymore. It's important for you to pay attention to this, my friends. A man should exhale through one nostril And this is just different types of pranayama. When his breath is exhausted, a wise man should keep his mind vigilantly under control, just as he would a wagon yoked to unruly horses. That's the metaphor of the horses, which are the senses, the 5 horses, the famous metaphor in the Kata and the Gita. Right? Okay, now where do you do this? Level and clean, free of gravel, fire and sand, near noiseless running water. I used to think, oh, why running water? It's kind of like new agey, water. And then once I was in not the Himalayas, I was in the Alps, and I sat down to meditate, and there was these bugs and gnats. Oh, it was awful. And then just to be cool, I sat on a rock in the middle of a flowing, a beautiful alpine river, no gnats. And I'd always thought I was this verse here, near noiseless running waters. I just thought that was kind of like background, new agey, like a new agey, like kind of background music, like, Omi kind of, and that would be helpful to, make the mind peaceful. I just thought that. But when I sat on this rock, I realized, hey, maybe this running water, it's noiseless, so it's not distracting, because if there's noise, it might distract the mind. But maybe the running water keeps the bugs away from them. I don't know that to be true, but I think that's a fair proposal as to why that's in this sort of the perfect place, right? Level and clean, free of gravel, fire. Well, that's a bit obvious, right? Well, sand and free of sand. I don't know why it should be free of sand, but anyway, near noiseless running waters and the like, pleasing to the mind, but not offensive to the eye, right? So you want something that's not going to disturb your mind. Basically, all of this, don't want to disturb the mind. Provided with a cave or a nook sheltered from the wind, right? Especially, of course, if you're in a state of Svarupa Vastanam, you won't experience the wind. But if you're a beginner and you're still practicing, then if it's windy, you might get distracted. So ideal place, a nice cave, nook. In such a spot, should one engage in yogic practice. And then it goes on about these apparitions, which sound a little bit tantric. Mist, smoke, sun, wind, fire, fireflies, lightning, crystal moon. These are the apparitions that within yogic practice, notice this, precede and pave the way to the full manifestation. So they're not the goal. All of these said, I think, probably the Hatha traditions and the Siddha traditions would develop these kinds of references and connect them to certain, prana rising up into the chakras and, but this is very, very early days. This is sort of, BCE. Right, let's skip all of that. So lightness, health, the absence of greed, okay, so you eat very little, a bright complexion, because you're very sattvic and you're, eating a pleasant voice. So, in other words, you're just in the forest, you're just eating berries and fruits and leaves, a sweet smell. So everything, the pores of your body are very sattvic. Even Krishna says, if you eat sattvic food, then all of the gates of your body become sattvic, and very little feces and urine, or just straight in your face. Well, that's just another way of saying you don't eat very much. Or how do you know whether whether you're eating too much? Well, have a look at how much you poop. So the Upanishads are going to call a spade a spade. So very little feces and urine. That, they say, is the first working of yogic practice, right? This is sort of getting, your preparation. Anyway, so we read 2 more. Just as the disc smeared with clay, right? So the Atman is covered by the mind with its kleshas and the vrittis. So it's compared to a disc smeared with clay. Once it is cleaned well, shines brightly. That's the Svarupa Vastanam. When all the chitta vrittis have been erodahad, well, then the drashtu Svarupa Vastanam, the seer abides in its own nature, right? Shines brightly. So also an embodied person, once he has perceived the true nature of the self, the Svarupa, the true nature, your own nature, your Sva. Sva means your own, Rupa. He becomes solitary, his goal attained, and free of sorrow. Right now, you don't need anything else. Don't need no support systems, nothing. You've experienced your eternal Atman. You're not afraid of death. No, the Abhiniveshaha, the 5th klesha, is for those who still identify with the body. Then you're still afraid of losing it, as long as you haven't experienced the Atman. I don't say you, me too. Last one. When by means of the true nature of the self, which resembles a lamp. How was he going to talk about it? He just said speech does not go there. Mind cannot reach it. Words cannot grasp it. So what do you do then? Well, you use metaphor. And the typical sort of mystic metaphor is light. The nearest thing we have in the realm of Prakriti to the Atman is light. So it resembles a lamp. We just said words can't go there. So either we don't say anything, Mona, and we just, some yogis just do Mona, and they try to teach by just Mona. They try to say, no, with nothing you can say about it. Well, that's not particularly helpful. So then better than that, at least this Upanishad's taking the position, better than that, we use some metaphor. So it resembles a lamp. Jnana Deepti, thank you. A man practice yogic restraint, tapaha, vairagya, sees here the true nature of Brahman. The seer, Patanjali calls it the drashtahu in verse number 3. Call it the drashtahu, call it the Atman, call it the Purusha, call it the Brahman, call it the knower of the field, call it Amagama, but it is a non-material entity and it's who we really ultimate, deep level, who we are. All other coverings we are not. We can discard them. Therefore, we are not those things. If you can discard something, then from your persona, then that's not your persona. So we can take off our clothes, we can take off our body, and moksha is we take off our mind. So if we can take something off, it's not who we actually ultimately, deeply, eternally are. The sat is something you can never take off. That's what sat means. And chit, you can never take off your consciousness, because sat and chit, because what is it that's sat? Chit is sat. Sat just means it's ongoing. So therefore, chit. So when he does that, he's freed from all fetters. This is the karma, the bonds, bandhana, Patanjali calls them, bandhana, the bonds of action-reaction, triggered by desire, which grows out of the field of ignorance, ignorance of the true self. Because he has known God, notice the theism here, Isha Pranidhana. Okay, so that's you have, when Patanjali says Anushasanam, he's continuing the teachings. Here he's continuing the teachings from the old Upanishads. So let's go now into the Nyaya, please. So what part of, so what do we? So what do the other schools say about yoga? Look at Nyaya 4.2.46. At the end of the whole text, it just spent a whole text, the whole Nyaya Sutras, using reason, not quoting scripture. Nyaya does not quote scripture, and neither does Patanjali quote scripture. Nyaya is using logic and reason to argue for an Atman. And yoga is saying, well, look, just chitta-vritti nirodha and you experience it for yourself. Tada, drashtu sarupe vastana. Neither of them quote scripture. Vedanta Sutra is all about scripture. Every single verse, 550 verses of the Vedanta Sutra, every single one of them is a discussion of some obscure or some passage in the Upanishad that needs clarification. So exegesis, the exegesis means, the hermeneutics, study of sacred texts, that's Vedanta. Experience is kind of a high experience is yoga, logic and reasoning is Nyaya. So this is Nyaya. After a whole text, engaging alternative points of view, establishing the truth of the Atman. At the end it says, what does it say? Fine, we've established it by reason, but for the purpose of attaining it, experiences, apavarga, that's a term Patanjali uses, apavarga, right? What happens when apavarga, somewhere in chapter 2, he uses the term apavarga. One of you will know the verse. Hanam, tad drishahe kaivalyam. Well, anyway, somewhere he has apavarga. So
Apavargata drishyam.
Say that again.
Bog apavagar.
Oh, what's the purpose? Yeah, what is the drishyam? What is its purpose? Boga pavargam artam. What's the artam of the drishyam? What is the purpose of the drishya? What is the purpose of prakriti? What the scene? Why is the scene there? Why is the world out there? Why is there a world? Bhoga apavarga. What's its artha? What's its purpose? What's the artham of the drishyam? Bhoga apavarga. Hang on. That's all right. So, for the purpose of attaining apavarga, right? If you don't want to use the world for bhoga, if you've realized, right, going back to that verse, bhoga apavarga, if you've realized that bhoga fails, it doesn't give the happiness we seek. Why? Parinama, because it's temporary. All of our little bhoga moments of bhoga, episodes of engagement in bhoga, they fail. They don't give us the happiness we seek. All we do is get older. And then our senses get weaker. And then we can't even enjoy anymore. And the teeth start falling out and you get indigestion and you know, your sexual drives diminish. So nature takes it away from you. If you haven't realized it yourself, well, nature comes along, gives you a helping hand and embarrasses you as you get old. Says that you thought that you spent your youth running around. Well, look, this is how you end up, pathetic and embarrassed and humiliated. So if we haven't really, so therefore, so the wise then, as Krishna says in the Gita, they're not interested in this. Yehi samsparshaja boga. Krishna says this boga comes from the contact of a sense with a sense object. Yehi samsparshaja boga dukkha yonaya ebate. They are yonis. They're the wombs of suffering. Why? Adyantavanta konteya. Because all pleasure has a beginning and an end. All bhoga has a beginning and an end. Nate shuramate buddha. A buddha, and a wise person, nate shuramate, doesn't take pleasure in them. Okay, so therefore the buddha rejects bhoga, right, and seeks the apavarga. Actually, you did well there, Eleonora. I'm sorry. Could you bring that verse back up? Let's connect. Let's connect to the Yoga Sutras. This is a course on the Yoga Sutra. Why is there down a little bit there? Krita Artam, no, back a little bit, back. Maybe 18. Here. 18, 218. What is the scene? The drishyam. Okay, the seer in verse 2. Here it is again, the seer, the drashtra. That's in the nominative case. So it's tra. When we had it in verse 3, it was drashtu uhu, because it's genitive case, but it's the same word. The drashtra of 17 is the drashtuhu of verse 3, right? When you do chitta vritti nirodha, tada, what happens? Drashtuhu sarupe vastanam. There is a situatedness of the seer in its own nature. Here is the same drashtuhu, but that was genitive and this is nominative. That's the seer. What's the scene? The drishyam. You'll notice the drush part of it is the same, the dr and the s, dr and s. And that's where you get the Hindu word darshana. If you go to a temple, you have darshana of the deity. So this drish is the Sanskrit root and it means to see. So you have the seer and you have the scene. So what is the scene? Which is prakriti. It's bhoga apavarga. What is it? Why is it there? It gives you bhoga. If you want bhoga, what did we just say? Krishna says the wise and the wise are not interested in this bhoga. What is bhoga? Yehi samsparsha ja bhoga. Bhoga is the samsparsha ja. It's born from contact of a sense with a sense object. That's bhoga. When the tongue eats a tasty food, when the eye sees an attractive object, that's bhoga. And if you desire to enjoy it, that's bhoga. So it's a samsparsha ja. It's born from samsparsha, contact of a sense with a sense object. Krishna says, dukkha yonaya. They are the womb, yoni, like linga yoni. They are the womb of dukkha, suffering. Bhoga is suffering. Why? Line 3. Adi antavanta kaunteya, O son of Kunti, Adi Antavan. They have an Adi and an Anta. They have a beginning and an end. Your boga can't last. Your Ben and Jerry's ice cream only lasts you 20 minutes. Or like 3 minutes, depending on how, right? Nateshu ramate buddha. A buddha, nateshu, or why? One who is awakened with the nateshu, not in them, ramate, ram, like Rama, does not enjoy them. Okay, so there's your Apavarga Boga. The scene, why is it there? You want Boga? Good luck. Try and find it. You never will. Fail. And when you realize it's a fail, then you become more serious about Apavarga. That's why suffering is our friend. And it's the first noble truth of Buddhism. Okay, back to Nyaya. And for the purpose of, that's the Apavarga. For the purpose of attaining Apavarga, there should be self-purification by means of yogic restraint, yamas and niyamas. So at the very end of Nyaya, after it's given all of its hard work, all of its logic, its reason, it's debated the Buddhists, debated the materialists, finally says, okay, you want to experience it? Then this is how you do it. And it's a reference to yoga. So Nyaya completely accepts it. There should, if you want to attain it, Nyaya has argued for it. It's defended it. It's tried to show that the belief in an Atman is more coherent and rational than other options. It's done all of that work for us, but reason cannot give it to you. And Nyaya recognizes it at the end. We just read in the Upanishads, not even reason bestirs itself. Mind can't grasp it. Nyaya recognizes it, but you've got to do the Nyaya work to believe, to be convinced that there is an Atman in the first place. Otherwise, why would you chittavritti nirodha? Other than to have a Swarupa experience, which means you are convinced that there is an Atman that can be Swarupa Vastanam. So Nyaya concedes at the end. It doesn't concede, it just recognizes that they've pushed reason as far as it goes. Now you want to go further, then you do the yoga. And it refers to yoga. There should be self-purification by means of yogic restraints, the yamas and niyamas, and the author here has translated psychological instructions. That's the Yoga Shastra. And methods taught in yoga. And he accepts it. Okay? So therefore, yoga is accepted by the other schools. What did we just do? We just looked at what yoga is in Patanjali. We looked at the Anu, what was it continuing from? We've had a glance at least at one other school. We're running out of time, so we won't look at the Vedanta. Well, we can quickly look at, no. And let's quickly look at, you know what? We don't have time to do the Gita. But yes, quickly. Let's look at the Gita, please, Aretha, if you don't mind. Very, very quickly, my friends. Gita needs to be another workshop for another day. We'll start with chapter 2. Gita does a completely new thing. Introduces a whole new, different type of yoga, not Nirodha. Gita says, it's going to say there's 2 yogas. And what yoga is for the Gita right here in 248, evenness of mind, meaning acting in the world, but indifferent to success or failure, 248, right? Fix in yoga, perform actions. What's Patanjali? Inaction, withdraw the senses from the sense objects. Complete and utter nirodha of everything, including the very mind itself. Gita's saying, no. Not saying no, it doesn't reject it. It's going to say, I'm teaching you a new method, Arjuna. And that is you perform action, but give up desire for the fruit. Abandon attachment. Become indifferent to success or failure. If you're not attached to the fruit, you won't be happy when things go well or sad when they don't, because you'll have no sense of, you'll simply have a sense of, did I do my dharma to the best of my ability? No attachment. And Krishna even defines yoga, gives a completely new definition of yoga, evenness of mind, samatvam. Okay, next page, he calls it karma sukoshalam yoga uchyate, right? Yoga karma sukoshalam. Yoga is skill in action. Patanjali is inaction. Nirodha, Nirodha, Pratyahara. But Gita is, what's the skill in action? Not skill isn't doing your job skillfully. No. What's the skill? Doing your work without attachment to the fruit. Okay. So then I'm very quickly, just throwing this out there. Chapter 3, please, of the Gita. Okay. So no, go back to the first page. Oh, okay, 3, 4. Can we make that? Oh, there we are. The blessed Lord spoke. In this world, there is a twofold. This is a mistranslation. It's not devotion. Nishta. There's two ways of keeping the mind nishta, fixed. I don't know why he put of devotion. Even over here, I have great respect for this. I use this all the time, but one or two things just bewilder me. Why does he put of devotion? There's no devotion here. Even here, he's got steadfastness, nishta. There's two ways of keeping the mind fixed. Taught since ancient times by me, Arjuna. Two types of yoga. That of knowledge, the yoga of the followers of Sankhya. That's Patanjali, the inaction path. So therefore, not the Jnana Yoga, Sankhya Yoga, Patanjali Yoga, it's all one inaction type of yoga. And then there's the second yoga, that of action, the yoga of the yogins. Notice he's calling that the yoga of the yogins. So the Gita talks about two yogas, and later on Vivekananda talks about 4, and so on. That's Vivekananda. But the Gita talks as two types of yoga. Look, in this world, there is a twofold basis of fixing the mind. Taught, forget this of devotion, taught since ancient times by me, Anushasanam, Arjuna. Knowledge, the yoga of the Sankhya. Okay? Sankhya Yoga, Jnana Yoga, same thing. Patanjali Yoga, and the yoga of action, the yoga of the yogins. All right, 2. Okay? Let's go to verse 4, chapter 4. 2 types of yoga. Back, please. Can we go back one page?
You said chapter 4.
Chapter 4, verse 1.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Look, so Krishna says his yoga, the yoga of action, he proclaimed this imperishable yoga, Vivishwan to Manu to Ikshvaku, so these ancient great beings, and down a bit. Next page, please. Thus received by succession, these are the ancient lineages. The royal seers knew this, not the kings knew it. After a long time here on earth, this yoga has been lost. Which yoga? Not the Patanjali one was still there in the Upanishads. Which yoga was lost? Krishna's yoga. Which yoga is that? The yoga of action. Act without desire got lost. Therefore, Krishna says, this ancient yoga is today declared by me to you. So he reestablishes the karma yoga, bhakti yoga that had become lost, the action yoga, where you act in the world. So that's the role of the Gita. So the Gita teaches action yoga, and Patanjali teaches inaction yoga. These are the 2 forms of yoga. Okay? So I just wanted to sort of just throw that out there, and we'll do a workshop on the Gita at some point. Okay, so we'll go back to the Yoga Sutras. We'll try to pull that. We'll try to pull all that together. We'll just summarize what we just did. So we so today was just an introductory lecture, and hopefully I'll have my computer fixed by next time, and I'll be in control of the text. But thank you so much, Eleonora, for your nice service there. And let's just bring up the Yoga Sutras again. And we're just having a quick glance at all of the if there's anything in the chats that I need to Anything I need to know? Sanskrit courses. All right. So let's fine. Right. So let's just go back to the okay. So the first sutra is Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Now Patanjali is going to continue the teachings. Okay. And we looked at the older expressions of yoga in the Katha Upanishads, and we looked at it in the Shveta. So we now have a bit of a sense of what does he mean by Anushasana? What's he can? I have to throw another log in the fire. Give me a second. Oof. So we spent some time, engaging how the commentaries work. They take one word like utter, and they really work it. They milk it to really kind of extract as much yogic philosophical guidance as they can. So utter means now you have the human form of life. It also means now you've done all your jnana and you've come to a conclusion that there is this Atman that the old sages have spoken about. Now we can continue this teachings of yoga. And what is actual yoga? It's chitta vritti nirodha. It's the stilling of the the vrittis, the activities, the movements, the revolvings. We spoke a little bit about what a vritti is. It has its source as a sense contact with a sense and a sense object. And that produces a imprint in the mind called a samskara. And these samskaras form the basis of all thought, including philosophical thought, in scientific inferences and hypotheses are all coming from observation, right? And philosophy too, ultimately, you're looking at the world, and then you're speculating, theorizing about what are the causes, and but ultimately it's all grounded in sense perception, and these produce these vrittis, and you have to still them all, and then then the seer can be situated in its own nature. Consciousness can no more distractions, like the magnet. Put something in front of it, it's going to attract it. If it's a metallic object, take away. You have to. So what Patanjali is doing is take away all distractions. Gita's giving a different method. Okay, act in the world. Let the senses engage the sense objects. Do your duties, have your families, do your professions, but do it all selflessly. Simply duty for duty's sake. I just wanted to just quickly have a little glance at that, and we'll do a workshop on that if there's interest in a future time. But the goal of this yoga is completely block out everything. Just by brute willpower. By sheer willpower, you close the senses, close the mind, and eliminate all possible distractions. And then tadadrashtu sarupe vastanam. Okay, so please familiarize yourself with at least those two verses. Yogish chitta vritti nirodha, tadadrashtu sarupe vastanam. Tada, then, drashtu, of the seer, svarupe, in its own nature, of astanam, the situatedness, the being situated. Then comes to be the being situated of the seer in its own nature. Remember that lovely Upanishad? Then the coming into being and the ceasing to be. What ceases to be? The chitta vrittis. What comes into being? The svarupa vastanam. And if it does not doing that, vritti sarupyam, consciousness is absorbed in the mind. That's you and me, my friends, which is constantly trapped in our minds. We're trapped in a world of thought. We're constantly thinking. And if we are going to be constantly thinking, then at least the next verse number 5, I can't scroll down. Then there are klishta and aklishta vrittis. Well, we'll maybe come back to this when we look at the kleshas, because the klishta vrittis, so there are 5 kinds of vrittis: panchataya, All right, there are 5 pancha, like pentagon, Pentateuch. Pancha is Indo-European for 5. So there's Panchatayaha, Vritayaha, there's 5 Britis, and they're either Klishta or Aklishta. Is the opposite. So Klishta and Aklishta. So Aklishta is the opposite of Klishta. When you put an in front of a noun, it's the opposite. So the Klishta Vritis are from the Kleshas, and we'll come back to this first when we look at the Kleshas: ignorance, ego, desire, aversion, clinging to life. So the Aklishta, the opposite. What's the opposite of ignorance? Well, knowledge of the self. What's the opposite of ego? Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, the real Asmi. What's the wrong Asmi? I'm body, mind. That's Klishta. That's the Klishta Asmi. So what's the real? So what's the Aklishta Asmi? Brahman Asmi. I'm Brahman. And then the Klishta Raga is Bhoga. Raga for Bhoga. I want to enjoy my senses with the sense objects. So what's the Aklishta Raga? It's Vairagya. To be, on the one hand, Vairagya for Bhoga, but on the other hand, Raga for the Atman, Raga for Bhagavan, desire for God, desire for the Atman. Those are Aklishta Vrittis. Okay, so let's take some questions. And we've reached our 8:03. Thank you to Eleonora for her patience. Sorry if I was barking out. Do this, do that.
Thank you for your patience.
Okay, friends. So we worked through the Yoga Sutras, and then I don't know. Let's just go with let's just go with wherever it takes us. I'm not very structured.
Professor, this is Aarti.
Hi, Aarti.
Hi, I was wondering, which do you practice, like inaction or action?
I'm a bhakta.
You follow Bhakti Yoga?
Yes, that's action yoga.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But I do Chitta Vritti Nirodha in the morning for an hour with mantra. Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So there's no reason why, the way I think of it, I do Patanjali at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I do Gita for the rest of from 6 o'clock onwards. So even if you're a bhakta, you still do a inaction yoga when you do japa. Japa is inaction yoga. So japa is one of the forms of bhakti. So so therefore you can do both. But if you do Patanjali yoga, then that's it. If you really are seeking the Sarupa Vastanam and the Patanjali method, that's why typically when we meet these yogis, they're in the forest. What did we just read in the Upanishad? In a cave by a running water, not on the Jersey Turnpike. So when you read the stories of the yogis in the old text, they're all in the forest. That's why Arjuna gets so confused. He's saying, Krishna, why are you telling me to act? Shouldn't I be withdrawing from the world? He gets confused. He asks the same question twice in chapter 3 and chapter 5. Because Krishna says it got lost, remember? So at Arjuna's time, there were no karma yoga. There wasn't the action yoga. We just read the verse in chapter 4. Krishna says there were 2 verses and one got lost. And now, Arjuna, I've come to reestablish it through you. So at the time that these texts were written, there was only Patanjali and yoga. So when you read references to yoga outside of the Gita, if you read the Mahabharata, the Puran, the Upanishads, all these texts, the yogis are all sitting in the forest. They're not, grihastas and householders and kings and queens and, bus drivers or, Vedic chariot drivers. They're all in the forest with dreadlocks and loincloths. When Ram is in the forest with Sita, every so often they run into yogis. They're all Nirodha yogis, sitting there, just sitting there. Mahabharata, same thing. Pandavas in the forest, yogi. So whenever you see the term yogi in the large, huge, massive corpus of Sanskrit texts, they're all forest dwellers. Why forest? Because they withdrawn, they pratyahara from the world. So everybody was doing Patanjali yoga up until the Gita was spoken. And Krishna himself says, there were two types and one got lost. We just read the verse. And I'm establishing it to you, Arjuna. And because it's so brand new, Arjuna gets confused. And twice asked the same question. Why are you telling me to act? You're giving me all this jnana, all this knowledge. Shouldn't I go to the forest with it and sit and meditate? But your question is about personal practice. Well, you can do Patanjali first thing in the morning if you do a japa practice or some other kind of meditation practice. And then you can do bhakti the rest of the day, meaning everything you do, you offer to Bhagavan. That's bhakti. And if you do karma yoga, well, you don't even have to believe in Bhagavan. Karma yoga is just you do your duty without desire for any personal gain. You do it to the best of your ability for duty's sake. It's a little Confucian. It's a little Confucianistic karma yoga. It's not necessarily theistic. If you don't believe in God, you can still do karma yoga. Another question. Thank you.
Professor Bryant,
Yeah.
I've heard some Advaita Vedanta teachers deride meditation because moksha would only be a realization, and they base it on the idea. They base it on the idea that you could have samadhi and not have the jhana to go with it, and not even know what you experienced. So that moksha has to be a realization and not a state. So, and that's like, so why meditate? So what are we to understand that there is some sort of a secondary moksha, like there's a preliminary realization, like an inference, and then a final realization after it, combined with meditation? What do you say to that?
Well, I don't think Shankaracharya says that, because if you read Shankara's Vedanta Sutra, he accepts yoga. So there may be some Advaitins that say that, but Shankaracharya didn't say that. So I would say that the state that you get through jnana, following Advaita Vedanta, you get to a place where where the mithya, where the falsity of the superimposition dissolves, and there's no more you, but let's say rhetorically, the you experiences the Sarvamidam Kalu Brahman, that everything is Brahman. That state of it's pure aware, it's just pure awareness, which just so happens to be Satchidananda in its very nature. It happens to be, you attain that state which Sat, which is, and which is what kind of isness is it? Well, it's conscious, it's pure consciousness, and it's blissful. That state, Patanjali is saying, you can attain it by instead of perceiving the unreality of the world just through intense jnana, introspection and extrospection, instead of sort of altering perception such that the mithya dissolves into jnana, you just block the mind altogether. You block the mind altogether. So I don't see how anyone could say that you wouldn't attain the same state. So I would resist that. I would point to Shankara himself accepting yoga as a means to attain that. Nirbija Samadhi is a state. Svarupa Vastanam is a state where consciousness is only conscious of consciousness. So there is no other. There is no awareness of the world. Now, whether the world was real or false, that's where Sankhya and Advaita Vedanta will debate. Was the world real in the first place, or was it always a superimposition? Well, Sankhya is going to say it was always real, but when you're in your Svarupa state, you're not aware of it. Advaita Vedanta would say, well, it was never real in the first place. It was a superimposition. What does it matter? When you're in the state, what is that state? It's a state of infinite, eternal consciousness, aware of consciousness, and it just so happens that happens to be an ununda state. So they're both talking about exactly the same state. So I would resist any suggestion that Patanjali is preliminary, and anybody that's saying that, I'm not sure has fully understood what Patanjali is saying. He's saying that your Svarupa, there's no more vrittis. the consciousness is completely withdrawn from the world. Whether the world is real or not real, it becomes redundant question at that point, becomes irrelevant question, because consciousness is unaware of anything else other than its svarupa, its own nature. Now, of course, at that point, there's no meaning to the word sva anymore, because sva, meaning one's own, is only meaningful, meaning there's no other. If you say one's own, then that's in reference to another. Now, Advaita Vedanta would say there never was another in the first place, but that's just a philosophical point. When you're in that state, it is both traditions agree and propose that state is a state where consciousness is not aware of, is only aware of pure consciousness. There is no other in that state. They both agree on what that experience is. Now, whether the world was real or not real is for the folks back home to argue. For the philosophers are going to argue that for 2,000 years. The experience is the same, is all I'm saying. And I would certainly not, I would not sort of, I would resist any idea that Patanjali is somehow preliminary. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask, Edwin?
Yeah.
As a Hindu, we're usually taught that at the end of the day, we are meant to experience moksha, to experience God, and not just merely know him by theory or by text. But then a friend of mine once came up to me and said, have you yourself experienced God? And I said, well, not yet. And she said, so then how can you go around preaching to us about experiencing God when you yourself have not experienced God? So how can we remedy that?
Well, you can be on the path. I mean, if somebody, does that mean that nobody can talk about if someone's on the path, does that mean you can't talk about it? If, the path is going to take time, and if somebody is on the path and following a process, and other people are interested in that path and that process, and somebody has some familiarity with the text, what's wrong with sharing those teachings, as long as you don't misrepresent yourself? And just say, look, I'm a seeker, I'm on the path, and I don't think we should be going around preaching, but if people are interested in these sacred teachings, and we happen to have some familiarity with the text, and we ourselves are on the path, and we can share the text with others, what's wrong with that? I don't see that otherwise, then what? Only the Jivan Mukta can ever speak about moksha, about the moksha traditions. You have to be a Jivan Mukta. Well, that would really limit the availability of the teachings. If only someone was a Jivan Mukta has the right to teach it, well, there'd be pretty few people teaching it. Seems to me perfectly all right if somebody is, really seriously situated on the path and not making any false pretensions or false claims, but just saying, look, I'm on a path, and somebody else comes along and says, I'm really interested in that path, but I'm new and I don't know much about it. Could you share, what you know about it? But what were you going to say? No, I can't tell you anything because I haven't attained moksha. I mean, how's that helpful to the other person? Seems to me you can, as long as you're not making any false claims, say, look, I haven't experienced it. I'm deeply committed, and these are the reasons why I'm deeply committed, and I did my Jnana Yoga, and I'm convinced of the truth that there is an Atman, and and I'm convinced of the path, but I haven't got there yet. I can share my experience, and I can share what the texts say. That seems to me perfectly honest.
I guess they were just more alluding to the fact that how can we discuss something when we ourselves haven't experienced it? How do we know for sure that what we're talking about is true? I guess that's what they're alluding to.
Well, if everything we say is grounded in the texts, and if the students agree that the text is a source of information that's worth considering, if what we say is not coming from our chitta vrittis, but we're reading the text. That's why I only teach from the text. I've never sort of sat and given a presentation just speaking. I mean, occasionally I do, but I mean, when we do these vidyayas, we're reading the sacred texts. As long as our discussion is grounded in the texts, then the discussion is grounded in something beyond our own imperfect chitta-vrittis. And so that then and for that to happen, there has to be a kind of a common agreement that these texts are worth considering. There, it's possible, at least possible, that these texts are speaking to us. They are great beings who have experienced the Atman, the Upanishadic sages, Patanjali, Krishna, whoever it might be. These are people that have, and that's why Shankaracharya in his commentary to the Vedanta Sutra says, well, what makes the Upanishad sacred is because they are the records of great sages. They are the experiences, so we may not have experienced it, but if the Upanishadic sages have, and we faithfully transmit the teachings, then what we have, then there's the possibility that the teachings, if they're grounded in the sacred texts, are transmitting information from enlightened beings. But we all have to be in agreement. A student has to be in agreement that, okay, I'm not enlightened, but the sacred texts could be, and I happen to feel that they are transmitting wisdom. And if you're interested, we can study them together. If you take a position like that, humble position, and okay, you haven't experienced it, but what about the Upanishadic sages, or what about great beings? Or if you're a Buddhist, you're going to be transmitting the teachings of the Buddha. You're going to believe that the Buddha is an enlightened being. If you're doing that really faithfully, if you're really not adding your own, because you're imperfect, we're klishta. So if we add too much of our own stuff, then we're transmitting our own egos. But if we're really, really what I call hugging the texts, then to the extent we do that, to the extent we're transmitting wisdom. Of course, everybody has to be in agreement that the texts are wisdom texts. And if they don't agree that, then why would they want to study it? They can go off and read, the New York Times, or go off and read, something else. But if there's agreement that these texts could, some kind of a sense that these are wisdom texts, then as long as we hug them as closely as we're able to, and we spend our lives studying, the more we spend our lives studying them, the more we immerse our own minds in them, the more we are genuinely transmitting them, free from our own egos, then the more there's a good chance that some of that wisdom does get transmitted, assuming that they are wisdom texts. And that's our assumption, that's our belief. And the student, at the very least, has to share that belief that the texts are worthy of consideration. That's the best I can do. Yeah.
Edwin,
Yeah.
you mentioned
Sylvia,
Krishnamurti.
hi.
Hi. You mentioned Krishnamurti. How does he differ from the Vedic traditions?
Well, he extricated himself from all kinds of institutionalized religion. He actually, as I remember, Krishnamurti was the son of a theosophist, and his parents went to the Theosophical Society, Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott in Madras, and somehow or other he was identified as whatever it was, the next prophet or the next avatar. I don't know who identified him. So he was brought up in this immense kind of pressure on him. If I'm getting the story right, I think it was Krishnamurti. Immense pressure on him that he was going to be this avatar, and he had this kind of stunted upbringing where all these sort of expectations were kind of piled onto him. Anyway, he broke free from all of that, and then turned his back on any kind of institutionalized religion. Of course, the Theosophists weren't particularly Vedic. That's not a Vedic tradition, but it was still an institutionalized tradition. And so by jettisoning that, he then jettisoned all forms of institutionalized religion, and he became a free thinker. I hope I got the story right. but something like that.
But he
And-
believes in the Atman or no?
You know, I haven't studied him deeply. I can't answer that question. I'm under the impression he might, but I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But he's, you know, brilliant, very, you know, I mean, he's a philosopher. He's a philosopher. I would consider him a philosopher, but a brilliant man. And I think I read him bits and pieces, you know, 45 years ago. I can't remember much now. Okay,
Thank you.
nice to see you, Sylvia.
Professor, one more question from me. Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yes.
Just you know, like we learn all these sutras, right? I was wondering, like, how do I practice, or how do I kind of keep thinking about it? Like, how do I apply in real life as we progress? So, just if you can kind of give us some insight how we can start applying for our daily life or those kind of things.
Well, the daily life yoga is the Bhagavad Gita. And that's the guide that gives us guidance how to, you know, work in the world, be a family member, be a daughter, be a mother, be a sister, be a professional. And that teaches us how to act in the world without desire. But we're doing the Yoga Sutras, and how do you apply the Yoga Sutras in life is you get up in the morning before the household wakes up, and you take your mantra, and you sit with a straight back, and you chant your mantra, and you fix your mind on the mantra. And whenever the mind goes off, you bring it back to the mantra, goes off, you bring them. That's how you practice what we're doing in this workshop, which is Patanjali Chitta Vritti Nirodha. The Gita then takes us out into the world, and into, you know, back into the family, back into the profession. But how to practice Patanjali? You get up before you do anything else. You take a shower, no eating. You take a shower, you know, and then you sit with a straight back, and you chant a mantra for, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever spot you are going to sign for that, and you chant your mantra. If you're a bhakta, you take the mantra of your Ishta Devata. So when I do my japa, it's the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So, you know, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. And you just repeat it, and the mind goes off. Can we look at, Arti, look at this verse. Eleonora, can you bring up chapter 6 of the Gita? Please.
Give me a second.
Yeah. Blow that up. Oh,
Can you see it?
yeah. Is that where it was? What was did I give you a verse number? Can you just scroll?
Yes, 11 plus.
Pardon?
11 plus.
But I'm looking for the verse. Okay. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. All right. Would you mind?
You're looking for the
Can you?
spinal.
No. Can you? Would you mind? Okay, let me do it here.
No.
No,
Tell
no,
me.
no. I'm going to look for a verse, and it's really. I think it's going to be great if we can look at it. Yata yata nischarati. Yata yata nischarati. 626.
There you are.
Okay, everybody. I think this one verse captures completely what it means to do Patanjali yoga. What does it mean to do Chitta Vritti Nirodha, my friends? We'll end on this. Okay? Can you make it a bit bigger, please? And keep 25 as well. Okay? Now, practically speaking, it's going to be a mantra. Patanjali's going to talk about mantra. We'll look at that next week. Okay, but I want to share 26 with you, but since we got 25 up, let's look at 25. Little by little, kshanesh kshane. Okay, this is not going to happen overnight, my friends. He should come to rest with the intellect firmly held. That's nirodha. The nirodha samskara is keeping the mind in a state of nirodha. His mind having been established in the shell, he should not think of anything. That's Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Now, so this is meditation. Whenever the unsteady mind, right, chanchala, wherever the unsteady mind moving to and fro wanders away, so you're trying to meditate, okay, Arti? So this is how you do it. You get up, you sit on the mat, you fix the mind on your mantra, and the mind starts to wander away. What do? He should restrain it and control it in the self. You just bring it back. Look at the Sanskrit. Yata yata nischarati. Wherever it wanders away. Manas chanchalam astiram. The mind which is chanchala, chalchal, going. This the going mind. Wherever it wanders away, it's astira. It's not fixed. Tatastato, from that place, niyam yetad, control it. Atmaneva vashamnayat, bring it back under the control of the self. So you're sitting there, okay? Can we go back to Arti? So you're sitting there. This is how you do yoga in the real world. You're sitting there and whatever your mantra is, Om. My mantra is Hare Krishna mantra. If you're a Shaiva, it's Om Namo Shivaya. I'll show you. So here I am. I get up in the morning before I do anything else. Mantras coming out of my mouth. And this is japa. We're going to look at it next week. Japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna. Right? The mind is fixed. And then Krishna just says what he says, wherever it wanders off. So I'm doing my Krishna mantra. If you could be Om or whatever your mantra is. And then I start thinking about email, or I start thinking about breakfast. And what does Krishna do? He doesn't say, don't beat yourself up. Don't say you can't do it. Just bring the mind back. That's meditation. It's nothing magical. It's nothing esoteric. You fix the mind on the mantra, wanders off, bring it back, wanders off, bring it back. That's how you do Patanjali yoga in the real world. And best time to do it is early in the morning, because once the day starts, your mind is going to be distracted. It's going to think of all the things you have to do.
Absolutely.
So therefore, you have a family person, so you get up before the family wakes up. If the kids wake up, there's no way you can meditate. You have your dharma for the kids and the family. So therefore, that's the tapas. That's the austerity. You get up half an hour before you know everybody's going to wake up, and that's your time that's your Patanjali time. And if you're a bhakta, that's your time with Bhagavan, because your mantra is Bhagavan. So you get two for the price of one if you're a bhakta. A, you nirodha the mind on the mantra, but B, if you're a bhakta, that mantra is Bhagavan. Your Hare Krishna is Krishna. Your Om Namo Shivaya is Shiva. So it's also your mind is uniting. It's nirodhing, but it's nirodhing on Bhagavan. So if you're a bhakta, you get two for the price of one. And if you're not a bhakta, then you're just nirodhing the mind.
I'm Shri. So I'll do Om.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Thank you, Arti. Thank you.
I have a question.
How you doing?
Yes.
How does vairagya fit in with what you just said? I've always seen vairagya as an outcome of one-pointed thought, or fixing the mind through samprajnata.
Well, you have to be in a state of vairagya in order to fix the mind, because you look at the word vairagya. Vai means without, and ragya means raga, which is the klesha, and which means rajas. because raga comes from rajas. It's the same Sanskrit root. So if you're vairagya, it means your mind is not in an agitated state of raga or rajas, but you're in a state of sattva. When the mind's in a state of sattva, then one of the qualities of sattva is it can be still. It's not agitated in the same way as a rajasic mind is agitated. So when it's sattvic, and it has to be sattvic in order to nirodha, then it's by definition, if it's sattvic, it's not rajasic. And if it's not rajasic, then it's in a state of vairaga. Rajas and raga are the same thing.
A little later in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali talks about ekatattva abhyasa as a way of stilling the disturbed mind or the ragas.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the driving force is ekatattva abhyasa, and vairagya is an outcome of that. It's a way of achieving vairagya.
Well, that's fine, but if you think that's fine. So ekatattva means on one, tattva means a thing out there, a tattva. So your mantra is a tattva, and it's eka, because it has to be eka because it's got to be nirodha, right? If it's more than eka, if it's more than one, then it's going to be jumping from one thing to another. So if you can keep your mind fixed, then it automatically becomes sattvic. So then if you're saying it's an outcome of that, that's fine. But if your mind is very rajasic, you're not going to be able to do, you're not going to be able to do ekatattva abhyasa for very long. And that's why there's Kriya Yoga. Why do you do Kriya Yoga? Samadhi bhavana artaha klesha tanu. You have to weaken the kleshas. One has to weaken the kleshas. And what are the yeah? So therefore, fair enough. You're saying, okay, you can look at it one way. If you do ekatattva and abhyasa, if you practice it, then definitely vairagya is an outcome. But one also has to, try to transform the mind, not just in the meditative moment, but the whole lifestyle. If one's lifestyle is raga laden, it's going to be very hard that if all the day one is chasing after ragas, and then one thinks, okay, now I can get up in the morning and just snap into a ekatattva type of abhyasa and attain the state of vairagya. That's going to be very, very hard, because the mind is going to be, if we're cultivating raga and rajasic lifestyle all day, it's going to be very hard to get up in the morning and then just sort of snap into and therefore yoga is a lifestyle. And therefore we have, yamas and niyamas and kriya yogas and all of these sort of action things to make the mind more sattvic. But technically speaking, if from a technical point of view, yes, if you abhyasa, if you practice ekatattva, fixing the mind on one thing, then but I don't think Patanjali puts it that way, though. He doesn't say ekatattva abhyasa vairagya emerges from that. He doesn't say, he doesn't put it that way.
He says the disturbances of the mind.
Yeah.
These samshaya,
Right.
the two sutras in front of that.
Yeah.
The ekatattva abhyasa stills that, but those are really the dramatic manifestation of raga.
Yeah, that's fine. But elsewhere, he recognizes that to really have any success in that, it's a whole package. You've got to do Kriya Yoga, you've got to do yamas and niyamas. It's got to be an entire transformation of lifestyle, because otherwise, there's not going to be much success if one is rajasic all day, consciously rajasic all day, and making no attempt to sort of transform one's lifestyle through the yamas and the niyamas and Kriya Yoga. Then one's rajasic. You can't just then get up in the morning and expect success.
But vairagya itself is a stilling of the mind.
No, I would say vairagya is a state of tapas. Tapas and nirodha is the stilling of the mind, and vairagya means without desire. That's a consequence.
Okay.
The word vai in Sanskrit, vi and vai means without something. So you tag it onto any noun. So if you have vi or vai, like vitrishna or vairagya, it's a separable prefix, and it means without that thing. So therefore, vairagya means a state of mind which is without raga. So that's a consequence. But how do we get rid of the ragas? Well, ragas are klesha. Well, how do we get rid of the kleshas? Well, kriya yoga, klesha tanukarana. Kriya yoga weakens the kleshas. And what else? Well, the ashtanga, ashuddhi kshaye. The ashtanga yoga weakens or removes the ashuddhi, the imperfections. They're both saying the same thing. So therefore, there has to be certain actions and lifestyle in the kriya yoga and ashtanga yoga in order to remove the ragas. And then when those ragas are removed, then the state is one of vairagya, you know, the vairagya. And then okay, fine. It also helps if you do ekatattva abhyasa, but you're not going to have success in that until the mind is really sattvic.
Okay.
And I don't think you can just have a rajasic, lifestyle for 23 hours. I mean, I'm being rhetorical, and then get up and have 1 hour just magically sattvic and be able to do ekatattva abhyasa. The lifestyle has to be, one has to cultivate a sattvic lifestyle, and that's, try to make the mind more and more and more sattvic, and then one will stand a much better chance of being able to be ekatattva.
And that's presupposed in samadhi.
Well, it's presupposed insofar as the yamas and the niyamas precede samadhi. So the yamas, so in other words, brahmacharya means, to be free of sexual desires, and all of the, the yamas and the niyamas are all sort of plugged into minimizing rajas and tamas and desires and the kleshas. He calls them ashuddhis when he talks about Ashtanga yoga. When he talks about Kriya yoga, he talks about the kleshas, the klesha tanukarana, weaken the kleshas. So the second chapter is, what do you do? How do you make the mind sattvic? How do you develop viveka? And then therefore there's Kriya yoga and Ashtanga yoga.
Okay.
So, yes,
Thank
so
you.
we have to become sattvic. But it's true, if you did abhyasa, practice, and to the extent one is successful in that, then if the mind is ekatattva, it's sattvic. At that moment, it's just going to be very, very hard. If the very nature of the mind is rajasic, and one cultivates a rajasic mind, it's going to be very hard to maintain ekatattva for more than a few seconds or minutes, even. Okay.
Edwin, I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask along that line, because I think that's in verse 132.
Yeah.
And so 130 and 131, he's listing the antarayas, the distractions to the mind. And so isn't he saying ekatattva abhyasa to counteract the distractions of the mind?
Yeah, he's saying
not
all that.
really,
He's saying
right?
all, absolutely. In chapter 1, he's talking about samadhi pada. Okay, samadhi is chittavritti nirodha, right? And that's how he defines it right at the beginning. And then he has, whatever it is, 23, all the different kinds of samadhis, vitarka, savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara. So, okay, so that's what it is. But chapter 2 is how you get there, and that involves action, that involves a kind of sattvicizing, and the commentaries talk a lot about this, making the mind sattvic, because when it's in a state of nirodha, when it's in a state of stillness, it's in a sattvic state. But it's not that you can be rajasic by choice, you follow and cultivate a rajasic life and then expect to have, get up in the morning and just suddenly magically be sattvic and be able to fix the mind. So that's why in chapter 2 we have kriya yoga, we have sadhana pada. There's sort of, and these involve lifestyle, behavioral changes, and therefore you have yamas, and you have niyamas, and then asanas and so forth. All of this is basically not the goal. What is it for then? It makes the mind sattvic. I mean, it frees it from the kleshas, including raga and desire, and from the ashuddhis, the imperfections, which are just ashuddhis, another way of referring to the kleshas. So there are things we have to do in terms of our lifestyle in order to be able to sit and meditate and remove the obstacles and the antarayas and anything else. So the first chapter just tells us what the goal is. And the second chapter tells us, well, how can we realistically get there? What kriyas do we have to do? And I would think of the one way of thinking of the second chapter is it is how do we cultivate sattva? Because the nirodha mind is a sattvic mind, and it's true. Fine, if you can ekatattva abhyasa, when you're in the state of ekatattva, you're in a state of sattva. And chapter 2 leads us to think you can't just magically, you've got to do kriya. You've got to do tapaha, you've got to do Ishvara Pranidhana, you've got to do svadhyaya, and then later on he's going to add, he's going to expand that. Brahmacharya, satyam, ahimsa, these are all things that are indispensable. They are prerequisites. And one way of thinking of them all is that they make you sattvic. Not as a goal and not as an end to itself. The goal of sattva is simply to put the mind into a state which is suitable for nirodha. Nirodha means sattva. Rajas means agitation. Rajas means the mind is not in a state of nirodha. It's running. It's thinking. It's contemplating ragas. Did I miss your point, Rhonda?
No, I think you helped clarify that too. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to that point that again, that chapter 1 is discussing samadhi but how are we going to do it?
Yeah.
But we have all these distractions, and there are these difficulties, and we have to learn to focus our mind.
Absolutely, but he doesn't introduce any of that until the second chapter. He doesn't talk about kleshas or all of that. So the first chapter is, this is the goal. It's like you go to an airport, right? And you want to go somewhere. First, you find out where you want to go. And then, okay, how am I going to get there? Buy a ticket, go to the airport, and all of that. So the first chapter is basically establishing the goal of yoga. Doesn't give that much. Okay, and he gives us japa. But mostly that's why it's called Samadhi Pada. He's establishing what the goal is. That's the primary feature, although he does give us, the practice of japa. So he doesn't start to introduce practice in the first chapter, but mostly it's Samadhi Pada. And then in the second chapter, it's sadhana. What do you do? And why do you do it? Why? And then you have the discussion on suffering, which is a big chunk of chapter 2. Why would you do it? Yeah, because we suffer. It's the only way to be free of suffering. That's a big component of chapter 2. Why are we doing this? Because sarvam dukkam. Everything is suffering. Why is it suffering? And then, parinama, because everything's temporary. Well, what's the cause of suffering? And then you get into that whole discussion of the union of the seer and the seen. And then he says, okay, then you need viveka. Well, how do you get this viveka? Viveka is sattva. Because Krishna says in Gita, the quality of sattva is jnana, knowledge. Viveka, jnana, vidya, these are all more or less synonyms. So, okay, how do you get it? Yoganga anushtana ashuddhikshaye. If you do the 8 limbs, ashuddhi, then you remove all of these ashuddhis, which are the kleshas. Ashuddhikshaye, right? Kleshatanu, ashuddhikshaye, jnana deeptir. Then that's how you get your viveka. You have to change your life. You have to follow brahmacharya. You have to sort of, ahimsa. So satyam and all of this. But one way of thinking about it all is that you're transforming the mind, your lifestyle, and your mind to sattvic. Because nirodha is sattvic. It's sattva, that stillness, and free of agitation. And vairagya, and without raga. But there's different ways of thinking about it and kind of like playing around with all of this.
Well, you know, it takes me back again to verse 112, Sutta 112, just, you know, where, you know, Abhyasa, Vairagya, and Nirodha, those three go together. It's like you're practicing all three together. Like one isn't necessarily lead to the other. You need to do all three.
You need to do all three, but keep in mind that Abhyasa and Vairagya are what Nirodha is. So in other words, that discussion is what is Nirodha? How do you engage in Nirodha? Well, Abhyasa and Vairagya. So Abhyasa and Vairagya are the components of Nirodha.
Right.
So yeah.
By Vivek, and then the word Viveka coming in there too.
Viveka comes in, yeah, when we talk about Ashtanga Yoga, and then we get Viveka.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions, my friends? I think we're all getting a bit tired.
Hi, Brian.
Yes.
I guess a question here. This is Marco.
Hi,
I have a
Marco.
twofold question. Like one is about the transitory aspects of Nirodha and Samadhi, if there is some, and talking about the final goal, how the final goal of Patanjali tradition relates to other goals of our tradition. So, for example, let's say that you practice your Chitti Vritti Nirodha and you get very good at it and you reach 8 Samadhi. Is this final liberation, or if you are in the world, you are still not liberated? Like, because is this state transitory? Like, you are there, you come back, but you are still in the world. And the second question is, if this state can be permanent, like perfect liberation, like Atman abides in the Atman. Sometimes when I read the descriptions of this state, it resembles a lot the descriptions of the goal of Buddhist approach, like the Nirvana, like also perfect liberation, perfect peace, only that in Patanjali, you abide, the Atman abide in the Atman, and in Buddhist, you abide in the impermanence of everything, including the self. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that, if there is some similarities or major differences.
Well, the yoga and, and Vedanta, in chapter 4, Patanjali does engage Buddhism and, disagrees with Buddhism. And one of the disagreements is that the Atman is permanent in Patanjali and Vedanta and impermanent in Buddhism. And but this, the state, I don't see them as the same. I think there are different kinds of liberated state. I don't see why why should we say that they're really all the same? They don't think they're really all the same. Nobody ever said they were the same. That's a kind of a modern New Agey thing to say, right? Oh, it's just different approaches to the same goal, and language is different, and culture is different, so they seem different. I don't see any reason. That's a very New Agey, modern kind of way of thinking. The traditions never said that about themselves. So either you take the view that one is right or one is wrong, or you take the view that they're all wrong, or you take the view that they're all right. And I think they're all right. I think there are different kinds of ultimate moksha states. I don't think they're the same. So I think you can have a Buddhist experience where you're not in a state of Svarupa Vastanam, but like, say, Mahayana Buddhism, samsara is nirvana, nirvana is a samsara, is just a way of being in the world and experiencing its momentary interdependent flow. It's just an enlightened way of being in the world. And I think that's a bona fide. That's what you seek and you follow those practices, that's what you get. And if you follow Patanjali, you get something else. You get an experience of the Svarupa Vastanam. And I don't think it's the same thing. And neither do the theologians of those traditions say it's the same thing. So for me, there are multiple different kinds of mokshas. It's not just the same. So in terms of your first question, the Sankhya takes the position that if you attain liberation in this life, you still have to live out the rest of that life, because that karma has been activated. All your latent karma is destroyed. You're not making any future karma, but whatever's been activated has been activated. And they give the example of a potter's wheel. You know, if when you make a pot in the old-fashioned potter's wheel, so you pump the wheel with your foot and it goes around and you make your pot. Now, if you take your foot off the pedal, it's not that the wheel just stops, because you've already invested kinetic energy into it. And therefore it has to just slow down once it burns up that kinetic energy. So in the same way, karma is activated at the moment of death. Your jati, ayo, boga. Your ayur, Patanjali calls it ayo. Your lifespan is already determined. So if it's determined for 60 years and you become enlightened at 40, you still have to live those other 20 years. And so can you just stay in that state? You know, for the most part, it seems that you can't, because your karma is going to pull you out, and you still have to eat, you still have to pee, and so forth. You can be as minimalistic as you possibly can, but mostly the texts say, you have to live out the rest of that natural life. Now, there are other texts that say you can raise your Atman, especially the Siddha texts. You can push your Atman out of the chakra at the top of the skull. And the other texts speak about, no, you don't have to stay. You can force exit. You can kind of like boot. You can, what do they call it when you reboot? You can just push your Atman right out as soon as you become. So that sometimes texts will say different things, but Sankhya and Yoga and Vedanta would take the view that you have to finish up that life. So you can go back into the state, but you can't stay there. Because karmically, your mind gets agitated and consciousness gets pulled out of the Swarupa state, and maybe you have to eat or use the bathroom or whatever it might be, that periodically your karma, you have to finish up your last 20 years. So that's yoga and Sankhya positions. But sometimes you see different traditions might say different things, and that's okay too. But the main point, I think, is that I don't think the moksha states are the same. And in my Krishna Bhakti traditions, they have no interest in Svarupa Vastanam. They want Bhagavan. They don't want to be stuck in an infinite state of Satchidananda, where that might be very nice compared to suffering in the world. But bhaktas, they want their beloved Bhagavan. They don't want to be absorbed in their own nature. They want to be absorbed in relationship with Bhagavan. And some Shaivas feel the same way. So therefore, there are different moksha destinations. So one should be careful one shouldn't assume that all paths are leading to the same goal. They're not, nor do they ever claim to. They take one to different goals and decide where you want to go and follow that path, but they're not going to the same place. They never said that. That's a very, very new agey thing. That's a very recent thing. This idea that they're all just yatomat tatopat, that comes out of Advaita Vedanta, actually. That 19th century Advaita Vedanta, this idea that all paths lead to the same goal. That's not what other traditions would say. Advaita Vedanta might say that, but other traditions wouldn't say that. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, one more question, my friends, and then we're getting close to 9 o'clock. Are we good? Nobody has their hands up.
Edwin.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
This is
Yes.
Bijan in San
Hi,
Francisco.
Bijan. Hey.
Hi. Hey, maybe we can do the short version of this regarding japa.
Yeah.
And kind of doing it in a Patanjalian way, Chitta Vidrodha. Well, suppose you're doing the Hare Krishna mantra.
Yeah.
I do the Hare Krishna mantra and I experience it in different ways, and sometimes it confuses me. Like sometimes I feel like if I turn up the bhakti, then I don't know if rajasic is the right word, but as the more emotion pours into it, I'm in a different state. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. I guess my question is, what's your take on that in does it depend on my goal? Basically, I can use it as a cognitive centering mechanism, or Yeah,
Well, can we piggyback on what I just said?
exact, please.
The goals are different. So what do you want? Do you want your Atman? In that case, you have to Nirodha all that.
Yeah.
If you want Bhagavan, then all of that ecstasy and emotionality and bliss is part of bhakti, and that's the goal you seek. You seek union, not union in a merging sense, not union in an Advaita sort of way. No, it's a dualism, but it's a union where the mind is absorbed in thoughts of God as a distinct being. The Vaishnava traditions have an element of dualism to them. If you want love of God, and love requires an other, the question is, do you want bliss or do you want love? So the Ananda, okay, then that's in your own Atman, and then Bhagavan just becomes a prop. It's just a prop. It's just a kind of a prop, but really you want to go beyond that, and you want to experience your own Svarupa. So the mantra is just a mechanism, it's just a technique, it's just a device to still the mind. You fix it on the mantra, and okay, and then if all these emotions come, well, actually, ultimately, you have to Nirodha them all. You have to be in a state of complete and utter Nirodha. That's if you're seeking the Atman. But if you're a Bhakta in certainly the Vaishnava and some Shaiva traditions, you don't want that. That you don't want your own Atman because you believe there's a greater Atman beyond your Atman, eternally greater, not temporarily, not as a prop, as a device, but there's an eternal Atman that's greater, and you accept the fact that you are an Atman, and you could just sort of get off the train, at the station, which gives you a Swarupa of Astanam, but you don't want that. You want to have an experience of relationship with the Supreme Bhagavan, and that's an experience of love and devotion, and then all of these emotions that you're talking about, then you dive into those. It's still, if it's japa, it's still a Nirodha practice, but you're not trying to Nirodha these emotions because that's your goal. That's the product of approaching Bhagavan and being in a kind of a relationship with Bhagavan. The product, the side effects of that are these beautiful, loving, ecstatic emotions. So which are kind of love, really. Prema, they're kind of expressions of love. So depending on what you want, if you want to do Patanjali for your Svarupa, you've got to Nirodha all of that. If you're doing bhakti, you want to cultivate that, encourage that, stir that. So if you think about it that way, do you want your Rupa, or do you want the Rupa of Bhagavan? Do you want your mind to be absorbed in this wonderful presence of this amazing being? Then automatically you can't help it. Ecstasy, anything that approaches Bhagavan is going to be overwhelmed with ecstatic symptoms. And you don't want to Nirodha those, because that's the eternal destiny of the Bhakta. So, yeah.
Sometimes just in follow-up, I definitely appreciate number 2 with the love of Bhagavan, but sometimes in practice, I feel like I need to dial it down because I get tired.
You get tired.
Yeah, and so I'm like, sometimes I just need like a peaceful japa.
Yeah.
It's the same mantra, but a different mood.
Okay.
Thank you.
The main thing is just to let the mantra, just surrender the mind to the mantra and let Bhagavan do whatever Bhagavan's going to do. Get your will out of the way, get your ego out of the way, get your, the mind out of the way, or do I want this or do I want that? And just let the mantra lead you wherever it's going to lead you. Because if you're a bhakta, then the mantra is Bhagavan.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you surrender to Bhagavan and let him do whatever he wants to do with the mind. Let that mantra do whatever it's going to do, and just throw out your own will.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an option. That's an option too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, my friends, shall we bid each other good night? And okay, good night. And we forge on next week. Hopefully my computer I'll be able to bring up the test. Thanks again for Eleonora, for
Thank you.
for Seva, and good night.
Thank you.
Okay.